How good was today? How good was today? I tell you, it's been a long time coming, but I think change is in the air. What do you reckon? We're starting to see more people firing up. This is the thing I've been saying since the beginning. People only care about politics once it touches them. And the smartest thing that Daniel Andrews did was let the construction workers keep working. Because for as long as it didn't touch them, they weren't going to do what we've just seen them do. What a moron. He was playing this beautifully. I got to say, like, for a psychopath, and he is, psychopaths are usually very intelligent, and I suspect he probably is quite an intelligent psychopath, but he's still a psychopath. He was playing this beautifully, like the divide and conquer. Just get little bits and pieces of the community and just squeeze them one at a time. Oh, it's only this sector that has to have the jab. Oh, it's that sector that has to have the jab now. Oh, those have already had the jab. Now we're just going to move on to another little narrow sector. And what that means, the people that aren't being affected yet, they don't speak up. The people that have already been forced into it and no one spoke up for them, well, they don't speak up either because they resent the fact that they've had to do it. And so at any given moment in time, there's only a small number of people that are going to be speaking up. It's what the federal government did by starting with the aged care workers and then moving it into some other healthcare workers and slowly rolling their way through different sectors. It's the smart play if you're a psychopath and you want to control people. But boy, I think he got this one wrong. I think he completely misread the mood. He completely misread the room. And boy, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. Now, of course, it hasn't really achieved anything yet, as you could argue neither have the protests that I've participated in over the last year and a half. But boy, oh boy, is the mood changing. Now, I want to talk lots about all of that because I think it's fascinating. There's some really interesting things. I'm not privy to what's happening behind closed doors, but you can understand and you can infer from the way different people are behaving what's going on behind closed doors, the deals that are being done, and how the people in power are trying to protect each other and help each other to maintain their death grip on power. So we're going to talk about that later on. Sorry, I wanted to say this right from the very outset. How awesome is Rukshan? Like, mind-blowingly awesome. How good is he? His coverage is fantastic. The guy's got guts. The guy's got guts. And gets great footage and gave us some good commentary today as well. I missed most of it. I was playing daddy today. I had 2 kids. My wife's currently paying our bills with all the lockdowns. It's hard for me to do anything. So she's paying the bills and I look after the kids, which I love. But it meant that I wasn't able to get in today. And I was relying on just catching snippets of what Rukshan did. And man, did he do an amazing job. That man is going to be exhausted tonight. And when I finally get to meet him in a casual setting, rather than just walking past him at a protest with riot police and so forth, I'm going to buy the man as many beers or whatever his drink of choice is as he can possibly fit in one night, because damn, I have so much respect for him. So thank you to Rukshan. You'll probably never see this, but man, massive credit to you today. Avi Yemeni was there as well. I didn't see much of his coverage, but I know he'll be putting out a report later on. His style is much more reporter. So it's worth mentioning. Rukshan is a journalist. If you were categorizing what each of us sort of do and the different people, what they do, Rukshan's a journalist. He gets there and he journals. He just simply documents and records everything. He describes to you the logistics of what he's doing and tends to try and remain very neutral. He doesn't try to color what's happening. He's just saying, hey, this is what's happening. Avi is a reporter. He's sticking the microphone in people's faces and doing interviews and getting that kind of content, other people's opinions, and then reporting them back to you. I'm what you would call a commentator. I'm looking at everything and I'm trying to assimilate it and make sense of it and then present it to you in such a way with a commentary that aligns everything and helps everything to make sense for you. So I love both of those guys and I love what they do. I think that what they do is a tremendous asset to Melbourne. I really appreciate it, especially on a day like today when I couldn't make it myself. And I look forward to seeing their reporting and seeing their journalism. And I enjoyed the journalism work that we saw today. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of commentary on today. A little bit later on. The first order of business today is I want to dispel this myth that on Saturday's protest, it was the protesters that were starting the violence. Now, anyone who watched my coverage or Rukshan's coverage or anyone's coverage, you already know that that's a lie. But I'm going to break it down and I'm going to show you using snippets of my own video from that day just how how much of a reversal of the truth that is. That is the complete inverse of the reality of what actually happened on Saturday. We're going to talk about that. We're going to finish by talking about this lady who was assaulted. There's no other word for it. Assaulted by the police, thrown to the ground, injured. I don't have authoritative information on what happened to her. Now, there have been some pretty wild rumors flying around. I doubt that the worst of those are true. I am hearing about a broken hip and other things like that, but I have yet to actually see something from a source that I would consider to be, that must be true. And so therefore, I don't know. I see, Mins, you've made a comment here saying that you watched both at the same time. Absolutely. And I know my own family, when I'm at protests, they have me on one screen and they have Rukshan on another screen, and then they'll probably have the Channel 9 chopper on another screen watching all the aerial shots and that sort of stuff, and almost setting up a command center to keep track of what's going on in the situation. So I think that's a great way to do it, because then you get the commentary, you get multiple camera angles, you get perspective, and you can switch the audio between them. So I want to start by talking about Saturday's protest, the fact that we actively avoided violence. We actively avoided confrontation. So Karina's saying that she went to hospital but was discharged. Another person, she's all right, had a concussion. I hope that that's true. But then there's a whole lot of other rumors flying around, and I have no way to actually verify that there is actually any truth to any specific one of those. I just don't know. So we'll talk a little bit about her, and I'll show you some footage. I know you've probably seen every single angle, but once you have the perspective, because I can tell you exactly the moment when that happened, and I will show you what was going on off that camera shot so that you understand exactly the context in which that assault took place. And I think I can infer from that why the assault took place as well. And we'll talk about that. And then we'll get on to what's happening with the unions, the CFMEU protests right now. John Setka, I would not be sleeping in my own bed tonight if I were you. The members, they are not happy with you at all. Okay, so let's kick this off. On Saturday, I went to another illegal protest. I should put the word illegal in bunny ears, because as I covered in a podcast that I did with Tim Quilty MP during 2020, I do not believe for a moment that the Victorian government have met the thresholds required in the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities to be able to abrogate our right to political protest, to gather for the purpose of political protest. I don't believe they're even close to meeting the legal threshold necessary of being able to prove that their restrictions are necessary, proportionate, reasonable, and justified. The restrictions on our liberties, on our freedoms granted to us, or not granted to us, they're ours, but discussed, covered within the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities. Those freedoms can only be abrogated in the event that there is a conflict between two freedoms. So one freedom comes in conflict with another freedom, and the restrictions must be reasonable, necessary, proportionate, and justified. Must be all four of those things. I don't believe for a split second that the Victorian government has actually met that threshold. I think that they know they haven't met that threshold, and I think they know that because they're not releasing the human rights assessments. They have to do human rights assessments to make sure that anything they do is compliant with the Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities. That's part of the Charter, and yet they are not releasing those publicly. Now, I just want to come back to that comment and just reread that. She was a member of my sister's boyfriend's congregation, Croatian Community Catholic Church, 70 years old, hospitalized, concussed. Son said she was discharged on Sunday and she's okay now, no broken bones. Well, Stuart, thank you for that report. I will accept your claim that you do know her, or at least know people that know her, and that's wonderful news indeed. Please make sure she's got a lot of support and around her, because that's a horrible thing for anyone at any age to go through. But that was just awful to see done to her, and under those circumstances, awful. Anyway, yes, someone was asking, is this an acid Cuba Cuba? Yes, it is an acid Cuba Cuba. I don't normally smoke infused cigars. Infused cigars have other herbs, spices, flavors, maybe vanilla or caramel or various other things in them. I don't normally smoke them because they're too sweet for me, but I had to, for the gag at the very start, I had to eat some popcorn, and the popcorn that I had was salted caramel. So I was going to be ruining my taste buds anyway, and I wasn't going to smoke one of my nice cigars with taste buds coated in caramel. So I grabbed one of these instead. Now, where were we? Okay, so getting on with this protest, talking about the fact that I was at this so-called illegal protest. I've covered the fact that I do not believe for a split second that they are actually illegal, and I do not accept any effort by the Premier, by the Chief Health Officer, or by the police to tell me that I do not have the human right to protest. I simply do not accept it. I will exercise my human rights. And if they eventually throw me in prison for that, if they stand me up in front of some judge who then decides that he has the power to take my human rights away from me, despite the fact that he very obviously doesn't, then so be it. This is where my motto comes from. Good people break bad laws. My life will not be judged by my obedience to the law. That is not how this works. And the law really, if we can get philosophical for a second, the purpose of the law is not to decide what's right and what's wrong. It's to recognize what's right and what's wrong, and to try and create a framework of incentives, punishments for doing what's wrong, incentives or at least freedom to do what's right, and not to define what's right and wrong, but just to actually identify what is right and wrong and make sure that the law aligns as closely as possible with that. So when the law loses alignment with right and wrong, it is our responsibility to do what's right and to not do what's wrong, and to ignore the law if necessary. So that's what I'm doing. This was my umpteenth protest. I haven't been to every single one, but I've been to quite a few of them. They have been becoming more and more violent recently. We saw at the last protest the use of rubber bullets for the very first time. And we came into this protest after a week of scare tactics and intimidation by the police and by the state government, trying to tell us that they were going to have 2,000 police officers on site. There were rumors circulating that they were going to be authorized to use any force necessary, whatever that means. There were all sorts of things going around. So there was a big scare campaign. The media got involved. So they were trying to put us off exercising our human right to protest. We protested anyway. Now, the numbers were down. There's no doubt about that. I would say the total numbers, if you factor in all the different splinter groups, because we never really all got together. There was a main body, and then there were a number of other groups. It was a tactically very tricky day, as we'll see when I get to some video here in a minute. I think there was about 4,000 in total, right? I can't verify that number, but that's my estimate on the total that we had. Definitely down on the last two protests. But let's remember, they shot Matt Lawson with rubber bullets. They shot at people with, pepper spray in the eyes, tear gas into the crowds, and they had a week-long psychological campaign to scare people away from coming to this protest. So it's not surprising that the numbers were down. Nevertheless, we had a solid 4,000 people there. So what I want to do is play you the first section. Now, this is about 4 different bits of my coverage early on in my coverage that I've edited together, and I've left just about a second of black in between each section, so you know when I'm doing a jump, when I'm doing a cut. We're going to watch this, and this is right from the very opening when I sort of first caught up with the group. The group had already gathered. There were already at least a couple of hundred people there when I sort of stepped out and saw them for the first time. And then we very quickly got on the move. So you'll listen to my commentary. You'll hear me and what I've got to say in real time as I was processing it and watching and observing the situation. And we will discuss all of that once this particular clip is finished. It goes for a couple of minutes, so I hope you're comfortable. And here we go. Where I'm looking at the moment, and you can see there's no shortage of police officers down there waiting for us. But actually, in the immediate area of where we are right now, it's not so bad. Not so many police. Now, we are quite vulnerable where we are, just talking tactically as I like to do. We need to get out of here. Yeah, absolutely. There's Rukshin. So we are starting to move, which is a very good idea, because I was about to say tactically we're quite vulnerable where we are. So we're going to march, we're going to chant, and we're going to get our way into a fluid situation, which is a lot harder for the police to respond to, rather than a static situation where they get to set themselves up and to dictate the terms of engagement. So I think the big news out of the opening of this is well done to the organisers. What a great job they've done. They've got a crowd, a critical mass together. It's going to be growing very quickly. Obviously, there's a lot of people that are going to be responding to the new location and won't have joined us yet, but they'll be pouring in. They'll be pouring in large numbers as they respond and find parking and get to our location. Our job, while we're this small, because this is a crowd size that could potentially be kettled, the police would fancy their chances of something like that. So our job is to stay mobile, keep them off balance. All right, we've got some police marching in front of us, potentially with the view to creating a roadblock. We need to make sure that we don't let them do that. I'm going to move over to the left-hand side of the road here. Okay, so I don't know if you can see it. I can see police marching towards us. Okay, they've stopped. They've stopped. I think they've realised that they don't have the numbers just there yet. Or are they? Are they going to try? Maybe they're going to try. We'll see. Sorry. We're going to have to wait and see what happens. Because they do not have the numbers to block the street. Hopefully they're smart enough to realise that. And they don't try. If they do, then things could get very interesting right from the very start of this protest. My hope is that they're smart enough to let us keep going. If they're not, then yeah, things are going to get real interesting real quick here. All right, so the police are still stationed at the intersection behind us. I'm just checking whether they're trying to cut us off from behind or not. They're not yet. And, well, this is turning into a bit of a flashpoint already. This protest has kind of started with some of the frustration and the angst from all of the previous protests, and looks like the crowd has decided that they're going to walk straight into a confrontation with the police. Now the police recognise that they are outnumbered. They are walking backwards. The police are holding their line, but they're walking backwards. Now they're turning around. Okay, I'm pretty sure that police line is not going to hold. I think they know that it's not going to hold. We've got plenty of exits to the left and to the right anyway, so this crowd could turn and go down a side street if we wished. Sorry, mate. But at this point, it certainly looks as though we are going to be permitted to make our point.
Fake news, fake news.
Excuse me.
Lies.
Just trying to move up closer to the front here. We've got, the police have now backed off all the way to the next major road, which is, I think, McCoppin Street. And so they're not going to be able to successfully, kettle us here. And they're going to have to allow us to choose which way we go from here. So, all right, so that was one continuous clip, and as much as possible, I've tried not to edit this together too much because people will accuse me of selective editing. So forgive me if the clips are a little bit longer than they strictly feel like they need to be, but I need to make a point right here. We had the option of walking towards the police or walking away from the police. And right from the get-go, our choice was to walk away from the police. That's the first thing that all these idiots are like, oh, the protesters were just there looking for a fight. The premier's come out, they were just a bunch of young hooligans looking for a fight. Really? Then why did we choose to walk the other way right from the outset? The only reason there's police in front of us right now is because they ran to catch up with us and get in front of us. That was the very opening. Now I'm just jumped a few minutes later. We'll continue this particular opening section. There's about 4 clips here. The rest of them are much shorter than that one. Let me try and get you. All right, so it's a decent sized crowd already. We're in a couple of thousand people already. You can see the crowd just stretching all the way back there. We're marching away from the city. So this is exactly what I'd hoped the organisers would do. They set up a new location. The police didn't respond fast enough, and now we're marching away from the police resources and not towards them. This is a very smart play by the organisers. Well done. Why is the crowd cheering? The crowd is cheering because the police are no longer facing us. They've now started walking in front of us. They are simply escorting us down the road. That is a very good move by the police. I will credit that move by turning around. They've taken away that sense of confrontation. And, I mean, they could turn around again at any moment. Let's not forget that. But for the time being, they've removed that sense of confrontation, and they are now walking in front of the crowd and simply clearing the road on our behalf. So this is as it should be. This is now all of a sudden the police facilitating this protest rather than trying to shut it down. Okay. So, pretty clear from the coverage live from the scene as it happened. We were walking away from the police resources. Police then maneuvered to get in front of us. They faced us but walked backwards for a while. And then when they turned their backs to us, we cheered them. We cheered them because they were removing that sense of confrontation with us. I also want to make another point here, and this is going to be really, really relevant at the end of this section of tonight's Slow Chat. They felt safe to turn their backs to us. Understand this. If they had any thought that their personal safety was in jeopardy, they would have continued to walk backwards the way that they had been up to that point in time, or they would have dispersed or done some other thing. There is no way in hell they would turn their backs to us and walk with their backs facing towards these supposedly dangerous protesters who just showed up for a fight. The narrative of the media, the government, and the police has already been exploded by the first couple of minutes of coverage, but it's going to get a whole lot worse for them as we go through.
Heading for a side street. We're trying to get there fast enough to create a flow that the police can't stop, but I doubt that that's going to happen.
Right. So you're about to see me get up close and personal with a police officer. This situation arose because we made a mistake. We took a turn down a street that didn't have enough exits. And then when we got, with a bunch of police resources had been stored in an area just out of sight, and they came out and blocked us in front, and we ran out of options to get out of that particular situation. So this was the last option, just closing here with me making an effort to try and get to it. We'll see how that goes, and then you'll hear me talking about the situation that we find ourselves in. So this was the first of two kettles.
Okay, here we go. Guys, move, go. Back up. All right, well, there we go, we're in.
Okay, so as I said, in real time, as it happened, the focus there was to try and create a stream of people that the police weren't able to cut through. They didn't have a lot of resources. They had only enough people to really make a fairly thin line. And if we'd had a solid block of 3 or 4 or 5 people wide all streaming around that corner, then the police would not have been able to cut that off. Unfortunately, there weren't enough of us who were aware. You could see people literally in front of me, closer to the problem than what I was, who actually weren't even aware of what was happening. And the number of us that were attempting to keep that exit route open, there just weren't enough of us. So I was literally the very first person to get stopped. And you saw me there, had a moment right in front of a police officer. And of course, I'm not going to have a fight. That's not what I'm there for. Once again, if I was there for a fight, that was my chance. I had a chance to go one-on-one with a police officer right there with all my mates at my back and all of his mates off to the side. If I was there for a fight, that was it. But I wasn't there for a fight. Let's continue. The situation becomes clear as I commentate here.
So much for the police representing the people. All right, we've got people investigating options, finding ways out.
Again, looking for ways out.
Well, that was a tactical error after a very good start. A tactical mistake has been made, and we find ourselves kettled for what is going to prove to be a very interesting afternoon. Sorry.
You'll notice a lot of people sitting down to signal their non-violent intent.
All right, so we've got the riot squad moving in.
Okay. So we sat down for a while. There's a jump there. There's a bunch of audio of time cut out. So a bunch of people have been sitting down. There's been a few people chanting. A few speeches have been made, that sort of thing. I've done a lap of the perimeter, checking out what our options are. There's a few places where people are streaming over fences and over gates, and I myself jump over a gate shortly. I don't show that because that's a long process to get through, but I'll be talking about it. And so some people are choosing to get out. My choice was to stay for as long as we had the numerical advantage and there was a real option to potentially push through the police lines. That has happened before, relatively non-violently. No one's been hurt in the past, or some people have a little bit, but no one's been significantly hurt in the past as we've pushed through, the police lines to regain our freedom at previous protests. It's happened at 2 previous protests already. And for as long as there was a reasonable probability that we might be able to do something like that, I was going to stay inside the kettle. What happened, though, is what you're about to see here, because they weren't satisfied with just having us kettled. Have a look.
They're bringing in busloads of attack troops. So, as you can see, there has been absolutely no violence initiated by us. That's been very, very clear. I've covered this protest right from the beginning. No violence has been initiated by us. I want to make that really clear. Anything that happens from now is entirely the responsibility of Victoria Police and their decisions that they make in this situation here. Look at that. There's literally there's thousands of police walking up.
I don't know how well you can see that. It's blurry. My phone is crap. And thank you to my anonymous donor. I have a GoPro on its way. So future coverage should be way, way, way better than this. But you can see in the middle of that shot, there's kind of a black mass with a white line across the top of it. That white line is the fluoro part of the tops of the uniforms and people's faces. There was an army, literally hundreds, multiple hundreds of officers just coming up that street towards us. They were 20 deep and all the way across the width of the street. This was not a group of people coming to have a nice handshake and a cup of tea. Let's be clear about that.
Towards us, pouring out of buses. There's hundreds of police up this end and more buses pulling up all the time. So here they are. They're bringing weapons, they're bringing body armour, they're bringing massive numbers of people to what? To a peaceful protest, all right? All right.
Nice to meet you.
You too. Thanks for being here. All right. So, increasing numbers of people are making it out over a fence. And I've got to say, that's a fairly appealing option, because if they arrest me, my page is gone. They will put bail conditions on me, so...
All right. So there was a bit of delay there, but I've led up to what happened next. I did go down into another property, jumped over a fence with the assistance of other people. There's plenty of other people who were doing it as well. I want to make this tactical note because this is important. We need the numbers to stay for as long as the numbers are going to make a difference. But the moment the police have the resources where our numbers are no longer meaningful, at that point, we need to shift. We need to change the tactical situation. And getting out from inside their grip is the best and fastest way to do that. So I got out. I jumped over that fence. I had to put the phone in my pocket while I did that. So I'm not going to show that to you here because it's just black and the sound of as the phone's in my pocket. But I then did a blocky. And you'll see this here of me coming around the last corner. And I'm now outside of the kettle. I'm on the other side of the thinner line of police that were holding us in that kettle.
So yeah, I'm sure a lot of you are going to have a lot to say about the decision that I just made. That's fine. You are entitled to your opinion. But I'm also entitled to make the tactical choices that I believe are best for me, for my family, for the platform that I've built. All right, so what have we got now? We've got a number of people holding their hands up, I think showing that they are not aggressive. They are not the aggressors in this situation. Let them go! 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 Okay.
Now, I've jumped again because a funny thing happened, but it took quite a while to happen. We ended up with so many people on the outside of that kettle because the people jumping over fences, they didn't piss off and go home. They weren't giving up. They were changing the tactical situation. And what they did was, like myself, they came around and they became a part of that crowd that was on the outside of the police kettle. And what was funny was we ended up with the massive mob of police at one end. The hundreds upon hundreds, maybe 1,000. I don't know. They've supposedly they had 2,000 working, and I could have believed there were 1,000 in the street. Then we had the kettled protesters, but then we had a thinner line of a few hundred police across that street and in support of them that were kettled by another group of protesters on the outside. So there was kind of a double kettle going on. That took quite some time to develop. And so I've cut it out here right up to the next major significant moment that changed the landscape on that day and further proves yet again that we were not there for violence. Every chance we got to get out of a confrontation, we took it. We were not looking for confrontation.
So the crowd is now moving en masse and vacating out the same way that I went before. All right, this is interesting. So all of a sudden the crowd is simply disappearing the same way that I went earlier. Someone's probably opened that gate and there's now a flood of people simply...
So I'm going to pause it there. You can't see it very well. To the naked eye, it was very clear that behind that row of police that are basically blocking our vision, the entire crowd was moving like a river. exactly into the area where I jumped over a very large metal gate. And I had it confirmed later on from someone that a resident presumably, had sympathized with us and had hit the button and had opened that gate. And all of a sudden, once the opportunity to avoid a violent confrontation was offered, the protesters gladly took it, proving yet again that that is not why we were there.
Now, I'm going to head down this street here to link up with them because I know where they're going to emerge. They're going to come out this way.
Okay. Now, I think we've already proved why we were there. We were there to exercise our human right to engage in lawful protest. Lawful being the key word. We weren't smashing things up. We weren't, beating up anyone. We weren't breaking things. It was non-violent and lawful in every sense of the word, except that Daniel Andrews believes that he can take away our human rights anytime he wants. They may not have been legal, although I would dispute even that, but we were certainly lawful, and we were certainly within our human rights. So I think the point is already proved. But now we get to the bit that everyone saw on the media. You saw that shot of these protesters rushing at police like a violent, crazed mob and charging into officers and knocking them over. And then you heard the people, the news anchors, the talking heads talking about how 6 police officers or 10 police officers, or different reporters seem to have different numbers. I don't know where they got them from. We're all injured by this mob of young, violent protesters who went out there looking for a fight. Let me show you the truth. Now some people... I should say, this one is another long one, like that first one was, because I don't want to be accused of selective editing. If people watch the video of that woman being violently assaulted and they're like, yeah, but what happened just before that, right? People's minds work in really weird ways. So I'm going to show you full context. We got out of that previous kettle. The protest regrouped. Most of us, there were different scattered groups by that point in time. The complicated tactical situation, that's always going to happen. But the main body of us then crossed over the Yarra River and marched along, and we pick it up here as we head into our second tactical mistake for the day, leading to our second kettle that then led to that moment that was all over the news.
Like to sort of naysay and say, well, what's the point? You're just marching around in circles and doing some chants and whatever else. Okay, sure. But imagine if no one even did this. Guys, come on! No, come on, guys, settle down!
Now, that's an important moment. Off camera, someone was damaging some property. They got immediately called out by another protester. I didn't see it, okay? Someone else called it out straight away as soon as they saw it. And then I joined in calling it out, and then you can hear people booing them, all right? We were not there to cause trouble.
Settle down, guys!
No violence! No violence!
Right. People are pretty fired up, and it's not...
I know, I'm feeling it.
Oh, mate. It's understandable, it's only human, but we've just got to swallow it, you know?
That will give them the more excuse to come in with their excuse.
Correct.
And attack.
We have to be the adults in the room when the police and the government won't be.
Exactly. Well said.
Alright, so hopefully we're not walking into a trap here. I doubt the police have got the resources up there yet. And again, this is a pretty good spot to kettle people, so let's just try and get through this nice and fast. Out the other side.
The downside of being situationally aware, which I try to maintain a high level of situational awareness in these protests, the downside is that actually both of these kettles I kind of saw coming before they actually happened. And with the previous kettle, I didn't show it here because it's not relevant to my purpose here, but you'll actually see me on my live stream going up to some of the guys who have the flags and people, if they lead somewhere, people tend to follow, and saying, hey guys, we need to not keep going this way because there's a kettle waiting for us down there. And they weren't able to turn the crowd around in time. Not their fault. It's a crowd. And unfortunately, sure enough, there was a kettle. Here I go again saying, oh, this is a bit dangerous. It's a choke point. Hopefully there's no kettle here. And once we're through here, we'll be okay. Yeah, well.
That way we'll have pretty well free reign. After we get outside of this choke point, there's places you can just go. Let's go, boys! Yeah, this is a terrible choke point. Once we're through it, we'll be right.
Hey, flashbacks to the barge.
Yeah. Oops, sorry guys, I'm not paying attention to where it's pointing. We've got people up the top there. Giving us a wave. Alright, I'm seeing some police uniforms down the bottom. Okay, yeah, here we go. Alright, so it's another kettle. It's another kettle. Alright, it's another kettle.
Now, I want to make a point here because I actually went back after I got home. I measured on Google Maps. We had walked more than 4 kilometers from where we started. We started outside of the police cordon that they'd set up around the city, and we marched away from the police. If we are now running into roadblocks made up of police, it's not our fault. They are watching us from their helicopters, from their drones, and they are deliberately putting these obstacles in our path. And then they have the hide to say that we went looking for a confrontation.
Yep, okay, so here we go again. Here we go again. Yep, we are. Like I said, I didn't like it. It's a bad choke point, and here we are. We are choked.
All right, you can see that's a pretty chunky line of police. They were there waiting for us. They'd picked their choke point perfectly. I mean, from a tactical point of view, we gave them a gift, right? And they made the most of it. From their perspective, I don't blame them. This is the correct play. However, we had other ideas. Again, I'm going to let this play through. There's about 6 more minutes left on this before it comes to its conclusion, and it's a conclusion worth waiting for. But I don't want to be accused of selective editing, so let's let this play through. Now, listen to the mood. This is a very different crowd to what it was an hour and however many minutes before when we met up. Before, we'd been harassed by police, chased for 4 kilometers, kettled once already, gone out of our way to avoid confrontation and had them get in our way time and time again. After 17 months of these guys being tormented by Daniel Andrews and oppressed by Victoria Police, we hit the streets yet again to actually exercise our human right to protest, and we were chased and harassed for kilometers and for over an hour, and the mood has shifted. You can hear it, right? Not everyone acted with honor on my side in this situation. Not every protester acted with honor. I'm not going to pretend that they did. But when you put it into context, it's pretty hard to say that each and every one of us should have been acting like good little angels under the circumstances 17 months in to this absolute farce.
Peacefully walking down the street. We were peacefully walking down the street, and here they are lined up with weapons at the ready, blocking the road, looking for a fight. Who came here for a fight? Not us. They came here for a fight.
Now, I want to make a point here. People say, oh, but they were throwing bottles full of water. They can hurt people. Yes, they can, and they shouldn't have been throwing them, okay? They shouldn't have been doing that. But we came with placards and bottles of water. They came with pepper spray. They came with batons. They came with guns on their hips. They're wearing body armor. They came ready for a fight. We're using, or the protesters that are choosing to do that, I wasn't one of them, and I don't agree with what they did, but the protesters who chose to do that were using what was in their hand that they brought with them for the purpose of hydration. The police officers are standing there with batons at the ready that they brought with them for the purpose of hitting people. There is a world of difference.
What an absolute disgrace in a supposedly free country. They came looking for violence. They came looking for violence. Look at them. Look at them. Look at them all. Creating confrontation, creating violence where there just didn't have to be any. Oh, sorry, mate. Move.
The police started to advance on us. Now, I'm going to move my way back up to the other end of the kettle now. I'm going to work my way through the crowd, but I want you to remember this end, because it is these police officers here who go on to push that woman over and assault her in that disgraceful way that we'll see from, I didn't catch it on my camera, but we'll see it from someone else's point of view a little bit later on. It's these officers that are guilty of that crime.
All right, so they're trying to just push in, pepper spray. They're getting quite aggressive now. I'm trying to get shots while I'm also walking and trying not to fall over. A lot of construction equipment. All right, so they're paused.
They're clearing out the walkways as well, and quite aggressively, quite violently.
Pepper spray coming down. Pepper spray coming down. Police moving in.
Now, people see a snippet taken out of something like this and say, oh, but you were verbally abusing the police. Yeah, after they chased us for 4 kilometers and over an hour, after 17 months of being tormented. Again, I'm going to cut these guys a little bit of slack.
Look who came here for a fight. It wasn't us. It wasn't us. There was no fight until they made one. There was no conflict until they made one.
Amen to that. Check the vulnerable women.
This is what Victoria looks like under Daniel Andrews. Congratulations, Victoria. This is what you've become. You can't even walk down a street with signs and chants without the police looking for an opportunity to have a confrontation. My guess is that we're cut off at the back as well. I assume we're completely kettled. I don't actually know, but I'll head up the back and have a look. Yeah, it looks like a police line at the back as well.
So again, I haven't covered it in these snippets, but I talk a lot about the decision-making process of crowds when I'm there live and I'm talking people through what's happening. There's no individual in charge here. It's a crowd-sourced decision-making process, and you can hear a lot of people appealing for everyone to sit down. Again, a non-violent response. We saw it at the last kettle, where even after all of the torment that we've been put through for the last hour and a bit, people's response under this amount of duress is to show their non-violent intent. Oh, crap. I just jumped to the wrong spot.
I assume we're completely kettled. I don't actually know, but I'll all right.
No violence, even on the megaphone. No violence.
Here we go again. Like I said, it's the final quarter. The police no doubt had more tricks up their sleeve, and unfortunately, we kind of gave them a free kick with this one. This was a bit of an easy one for them.
Don't be soft.
decision-making
I'm going to put the phone down again for a second.
You've got one group saying, everyone sit down. You've got another person and the people closer to the police line saying, hey, actually, let's stand up. I decided to rehydrate at this point.
Second, have some more water and maybe stand in the shade for a little while. I'm getting pretty warm.
Push the line! There isn't there. Push through! Let's go! Push through! Let's go!
Okay. So now the crowd has come up with a new decision. We're going to push through. Now, are enough people going to do it? No one knows. How does it end? No one knows.
Push through. Easy to say. Not so easy to do. Because ultimately, this place is the first one to forget. They brought weapons and we didn't.
They brought weapons and we didn't.
That makes it very easy to say push through. It's a very difficult thing to do. Here we go. All right, it's happening. It's happening. Truncheons are flying. Go, go, go. Truncheons are flying. Johnny! It's the running of the balls. All right. Hey! Hey! Fuck off! None of that! Come on, man! No! Come on! Fuck up! We're better than that! Fuck's sake!
Fucking bashing women!
All right, well, that was interesting. You've just seen a pretty clear example of just how high the tensions are now.
That is the moment that the news chose to show a nice high angle of a whole bunch of people charging into a police line, and they ran with the story that we were the ones that went and started violence. Now you know the truth. That's how it actually played out. Now, this is the hardest part for me, is what happened to this woman, Anne, I believe her name is. And there's another gentleman who got a good angle of this. Now, I unfortunately, I couldn't download this video. The software that I use for downloading Facebook videos was struggling with this one for some reason. So I'm going to have to play this a little bit differently. And it's not going to have audio, unfortunately. It's a limitation on StreamYard. But you're going to see it. Now, I believe you can see it now. Oh. Okay, I think maybe I have to stay on that. Can you just confirm, can you see that image? Can someone just throw a comment in for me? Can you see that image of the higher sort of angle of the valley there? Just waiting for someone to comment and say and just confirm for me. Yep, good. Okay. So I want to pause it here. This is the very first frame of the video that I have, so I can't show you any more than that. Now, I know for a fact, because I was there, that that's looking down the hill. This is the moment, because there's no one else there, I know that this is the moment just after we broke through up the hill, right? So this is the moment when the crowd just went rushing away from these police officers, who were hopped up in their heads, ready and waiting, and I dare say wanting a fight. And suddenly they were deprived of that fight because the whole crowd went in the other direction. There is no one near this woman. The person in white, I believe, and I don't know this for a fact, but I believe that that is the age photographer that they pepper sprayed and abused as well. So you have a press photographer, you have a woman who is reported as being 70 years old. I don't know how old she actually is. And you have another gentleman there who's also not being violent. You have a person running away just off to the left of the woman in red. Watch what happens to the woman in red and think about the mental state that a human being has to be in to do this to a woman standing there on her own, holding an Australian flag. You get that? Then the police came out and said, we were the problem. The Premier came out and said, we were looking for a fight. The press came out and said that we started all the violence. Yeah. Well, you know better now. So, unfortunately, that is the reality on the streets of Victoria today. Now, I know a lot of more people are watching than were watching before. We did get a report earlier, someone who claims to know or know people who know the woman who was pushed over. Apparently, she was discharged with a concussion and no broken bones. So the rumors that were much worse than that proved to be just that, just rumors. And as I always say, you've got to, in these moments, you've got to let 24 or 48 hours pass before you start passing on those sorts of rumors, because you just don't know what's true and what's not. But that is the reality of trying to exercise your human right to protest in Victoria under Daniel Andrews today. And I wanted to do that. Yes, I know that's taken 52 minutes, 53 minutes to do. But I wanted to show you large sections of footage. From my personal perspective, apart from that last one, that was somebody else's footage. Everything else was what I saw. And you heard my commentary that was live in the moment at the time. You heard me on multiple occasions telling people who were my fellow protesters to settle down, to not initiate violence. You heard me right at the end, even after having to run past police that were trying to hit me with batons, which is by definition a deadly weapon, by the way. People were trying to run past them, and they were reaching out and trying to strike us with deadly weapons. And even in that moment, you saw it, you heard me. When a person ran in to try and jump on the back of a police officer, I screamed at him to get the fuck off. And he did, right? You didn't see a second person. The camera was kind of pointed that way, or the phone was in his hand. There's a second person that tried to run past me as well, and I stopped him, okay? Even in that moment, and almost everybody, with a few exceptions, almost everybody in that crowd wanted no part of any violence. All we wanted was to be able to exercise our human right to protest, to have our voices be heard, and our human rights respected. That's all we wanted. So next time someone tells you that the protesters were the problem, you send them to this video and you tell them, listen, you sit down for 53 minutes and you learn just how wrong you are and just how manipulated you are by the media, by the Premier, and even by police command themselves, who should be neutral and we should be able to rely on and depend on for accurate information. They are lying to you. Okay. So that was Saturday's protest. But boy, has a lot happened since then. And I'm sorry if that was heavy. I'll tell you, it was heavy being there. I'll tell you that. That was a heavy place to be. And I came home from that really torn, really conflicted. I mean, you can go back onto my Facebook page and you'll see what I posted after that particular day. Really heavy, really proud to have been a part of it, and really proud of how well the crowd actually did behave. And you've seen that now for yourself. However, the media choose to take those couple of moments where we're pushing back. We're not initiating violence. We're pushing back against the violence. And they use those moments to try and smear us. Now, of course, the topic of the moment is what's happening with the CFMEU and the protest that happened outside of their office today. This is trying to go out on me. I've been talking too much and smoking too little. Right. So you remember, was it 2 days ago, 3 days ago? We started to see these really interesting protests from construction workers that decided to have their move their lunchrooms into the middle of the roads, and they were blocking trams and blocking streets and that sort of thing. And now I bought into the line. I should know better, for crying out loud. I should know better. But I bought into the line that it was about the restriction on their break rooms, right? Because at the time I wasn't seeing any alternative media or any direct coverage telling me otherwise. I had my suspicions, but that was the information that I had access to, and I repeated that. Turns out that was never true, and we proved that, or we saw that beyond any shadow of doubt today. And anyone that was watching Rukshan's footage, or anyone that sees Avi's coverage of today, you will hear the chants, I defy you, go through Rukshan's coverage, hours of coverage, and find a single chant from the crowd that was about break rooms. It was not. They were against Daniel Andrews. They were upset with their union, and they do not want to have mandatory vaccinations. I think my favorite chant from today was "Shove your fucking vaccine up your ass." I think that was probably my favorite chant out of all the ones that I heard today. Now, I didn't get to see all of the coverage. I was looking after 2 kids today, and I was able to dip in and out and try and build a picture of what happened. So I'm not going to give you a blow-by-blow of what happened today. I'm not in a position to do that. But I want to talk a little bit about the significance of the CFMEU members, not the organization. They're a disgrace, and they're disgracing themselves even further right now. But CFMEU members turning on Daniel Andrews. Sorry, just trying to make sure this doesn't go out on me. The union, the Labor Party is basically run by unions. And I'm not going to go into details about pre-selection and how that all sort of works. But basically, the very brief version is, in order to become a Labor MP, in order to be elected, you have to win pre-selection so that you are their candidate in a given seat or a given Senate position or upper house, lower house position. In order to get pre-selected, you need to be supported by your particular branch of the Labor Party, and those branches are essentially run by the unions. And in order to get up, you need to be supported by the right unions. The CFMEU are a very powerful union. They're known to be very militant. They supply a lot of money to the Labor Party, and they wield tremendous power within the Labor Party. Now, that, of course, is the CFMEU as an organization. Now, they will tell you that they're a member organization. They represent the will of their members. And what we're seeing here is the reality that most of us have known for a long time, but the absolute reality that the union as an organization has actually betrayed its members. John Setka is now interested in his own little kingdom that he's built, not actually representing the will of the members. So when they started gathering this morning, and they began to gather out the front of the CFMEU's headquarters on Elizabeth Street, I thought, oh, this is interesting. This is actually somewhat unexpected because, again, I was dumb enough to believe the lie that it was about the break rooms, for crying out loud. We all have our moments, okay? I can still be really dumb sometimes. And so I sat there and went, hang on, have I been lied to? Well, obviously, yes, I have. So it very quickly became apparent as I began to see coverage of the gathering out the front of CFMEU headquarters that this was about the jab. This was about mandatory vaccinations. Tomorrow is the day for the construction industry where they're not allowed to work unless they've been jabbed. It's a completely unworkable system. John, I did like this one. Daniel Andrews' bitch is what the members were chanting at John Setka when he came out and tried to front them. Just amazing scenes. They were literally protesting against their own union. Things escalated very quickly. Now, John Setka's position is it is now an untenable one. It wasn't this morning. His position is now untenable. He stood out the front of the members and basically said, oh, I've never supported mandatory vaccinations. You find me saying that I support mandatory vaccinations, etc., and tried to play nice with the crowd and said, listen, we're going to go inside the headquarters and we're going to have a discussion as a union and we're going to make a decision about what we're going to do. And what the crowd wanted to do, which grew into the many hundreds, if not well over 1,000. I don't actually have a crowd estimate, but you can look at the videos as well. I would argue there's 1,000 or more people there. But again, I wasn't there in person, and cameras can be deceptive, so don't take my word for it. But what they wanted to do was march to Parliament House. And I was sitting there thinking, this is going to be fascinating for so many reasons. Number one, what's happening within the union, which therefore means what's happening within the power structure of the Labor Party itself and the support for Daniel Andrews himself. But also, how are the police going to respond? I mean, you just saw what they did to us on Saturday. Now, one of the things that we've been saying is we've been running these or not running, I don't organize anything, but as I've been attending these protests repeatedly, trying to exercise our human right to protest, pointing out the discrepancy between our treatment and the treatment of Black Lives Matter, right? The police knelt down in front of Black Lives Matter. There were supposed to be restrictions at the time. They weren't supposed to be out. They were breaking the chief health officer's orders. The police guided traffic and knelt in front of them. Then when we protest, they come at us with riot gear. We've been pointing that out for quite some time. And I sat there and thought, hang on, The police are now in an impossible situation. They're either going to have to let the unions march and let them have this protest, even if they didn't march anywhere, let them stand out the front of the headquarters. Even that's a massive breach of the Cho's orders. And if they allow that to happen, whatever is left, whatever shreds of credibility VicPol have left are gone. But they're smart enough to know that. So maybe they will go in heavy on the union members. But guess what's going to happen the day after, which is now tomorrow? Because in the end, they did go in heavy. I don't know how much of the coverage you guys watched, but it was horrifying the way ultimately the riot squad just came in, and literally there wasn't even physical contact with the riot squad before they opened fire, and they were firing rubber bullets. Now, these things, they're called less lethal for a reason. They're not called non-lethal. They're called less lethal. And you may remember Matt Lawson got hit with one at a previous protest. And if you don't follow Matt Lawson, I highly recommend you do. He's most active on Telegram. Look him up on Telegram. You will see the images of the damage that did to his body, the bruising that caused, hitting him in the body. You can only imagine what happens if one of those hits someone in the head. They actually broke the glass, the windows of cars. When some of these rubber bullets hit cars, they broke the glass. Such is the force in these projectiles. What we have now is a government that is willing to use potentially lethal force as a first step when dealing with a protest. We didn't see it as a first step before. We saw them use it, which is still disgraceful, but this is now another escalation. They're using it as a first step against a crowd that they do not want to be there. What's interesting is what's happening inside the union and what's happening with John Setka. So someone asked a minute ago, do I think he'll resign? No, I don't think he will, because I think he has the same hubris that Daniel Andrews has. Daniel Andrews is very unlikely to ever resign. He's going to have to be removed from that position. Hopefully he'll get removed peacefully by members of his own party who recognize how out of control he is. If he overstays his welcome by too much, then other options will start to come into play for some people, not for me, but for some people, no doubt, they'll be thinking through what other options they might have. John Setka, I think, will try and do the same thing. He is being propped up by the Labor Party, and the Labor Party are propping him up because they want to protect themselves from these angry members. But I can't see how that does anything other than backfire. You know, they've now announced, as people have been making the comments, they've now announced a 2-week shutdown of the entire construction industry. So all those people that would have been going to work, the ones that have been vaccinated and would have still been allowed to work tomorrow, they can't. Where do you think they're going to go? All they've done is make a whole lot more CFMEU members very angry, even the ones that are double vaccinated, and given people a lot more reason to continue. So I'm of the opinion that what we are looking at right now is the single most pivotal moment in the last 17 months of Victorian history. Ever since little dictator Dan started to go on his power trip, shut down the parliament, started operating outside of judicial oversight, outside of parliamentary oversight, outside of human rights legislation, became a little dictator ruling by decree. I've been pushing back many others, and I'm grateful to everyone, the thousands, literally thousands of people that have joined at least one of the protests over the journey. But unfortunately, our numbers weren't enough. And we know from the police explanation of their very soft treatment of the Black Lives Matter protest, one of the ways they tried to explain that away was, I think it was Cornelius, said they were worried about violence. They were worried if they tried to stop the march, then it would become violent, right? Now, to hear Victoria Police say that they're worried about violence in light of what they do to us is an absolute disgrace. It's a joke, but not even a good one. But what that tells us is, in a way, what they've done is set up an incentive for people to be violent. And if there's one group that knows how to be violent in order to get what they want, it's the CFMEU. The unions. They know how to make a mess. And I don't think that VicPol want to risk going toe-to-toe with the CFMEU in large numbers. But I'm of the opinion that as of tomorrow, and then the day after and the day after that, we are going to see growing numbers hitting the streets of, yes, lots of union members, but then lots of other members of the public, because this is much more broad. This is not just a union dispute. This is a human rights issue. And it's very, very nice to finally have the union on our side. So that is my very brief commentary on what's happening with the CFMEU stuff. I wasn't there in person, so I can't talk to you in detail about what happened on the ground. Go to Rukshan's page on Facebook. I think he's elsewhere as well, but he's certainly on Facebook, and you can watch the entire thing play out. He covered it brilliantly. No doubt, Avi was there and he was interviewing people. No doubt he'll be putting out a report. He's probably tonight sometime. Watch that after we're done here. And he will have the commentary and comments from people who are actually there on the reasons why they were there. I think Joel is spot on. I think that this will prove to be a really significant turning point. Does that mean that victory is instantaneous? No, it doesn't. But things are going to keep escalating. Those of you that watch my coverage of the protests, you'll remember me. I began to use the expression, I think 2 protests ago, so 2 months ago, I began to use the expression an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. That's what's happening right now in Victoria. Daniel Andrews has no intention of moving, and the people have no intention of stopping. Now, Kai is absolutely right. The union is not on their side, but remember, the union leadership and the union membership, are 2 very different things. And unions basically are their own little government, right? They charge taxes or membership fees on their members, and they claim that they spend that money in the best interest of the members, but in actual fact, they just use it to pad their lifestyles and to go on junkets and to make sure they protect their power. That's what unions are ultimately about. And we're seeing that playing out very clearly now with a huge disconnect between the union membership and the union leadership. We're seeing that. Now, I've been a little bit out of the loop for the last couple of hours, getting all that video ready for you guys and getting ready for tonight. But I've seen that the union have come out and basically said it was right-wing extremists, wasn't us, blah, blah, blah. The members who were there know that that's a lie. And you know how to really piss somebody off? Lie about them, right? The members that were there today are right now on the phone to their friends who they know are members, and even other people that aren't members that are affected by the shutdown especially. They're on the phone saying, we're going back there tomorrow, we're doing it again, and we're not going to stop until we win. So I think we have reached a really interesting inflection point, a moment. And Keith, this is a great point, Keith. CFMEU, late to the game, but happy to stand shoulder to shoulder. This affects all of us. I've been saying this for a little while as well. We can't be choosy about our allies, right? We can't be choosy about who's actually on our side. We don't have that luxury. There aren't enough of us. We have to be willing to welcome with open arms everyone that comes to join this cause. We can't be sitting there going, oh, well, where were you a year ago? Where were you 3 months ago, right? None of that. We just have to say, hey, guys, nice to have you. Let's go. Let's finish this. Let's put an end to the human rights abuses. Let's put an end to this absolute living nightmare that we've been trapped in for the last 17 months. Politics, unfortunately, people don't pay attention to it until it touches them directly. And as I said at the opening of this video, of this slow chat, Daniel Andrews was very clever in how he oppressed the people of Victoria. He made sure that certain key sectors were less affected. And construction was one that he's looked after very carefully the whole way through. And I think that was tactically a very intelligent move by him. Now he's dropped the ball. He's fumbled. And all of a sudden, the people that he thought were in his corner were absolutely locked in for him. They are turning on him, and they are turning on him in very, very large numbers. So how does this go from here? If I can do the crystal ball thing for a moment. Well, no one knows for sure. I think we are going to see a rapid escalation in the intensity and frequency of protests. Unfortunately, because of Victoria Police, we are going to see a rapid escalation in violence. However, someone made the comment a minute ago that apparently there are 3,000 police ready to walk. Now, I don't have a number, but I do know there are a lot of police very unhappy with how they are being used. They signed up for the right reasons. They became police officers for the right reasons, and they are very unhappy with the way that their good faith and their willingness to serve is now being abused for political purposes by Daniel Andrews. Unfortunately, up until this point in time, they're unhappy behind closed doors, and that's not good enough. We need to see Victoria Police come out publicly, unhappy in public, risking their careers, risking their future progression and promotion and whatever else within the police force. What's happening is a disgrace. I believe I showed that to you pretty conclusively in the first half of tonight's slow chat. What Victoria Police are doing under orders from police senior command is an absolute disgrace. And in a way, it mirrors what's happening with the union, right? Union command and union members are now at odds. They're at war with each other. Police command and police members are two very different groups. And right now, what we've seen is actually the will of police command. What we need to see are the police members taking control of their own destiny, making the right moral choices for themselves in large numbers and speaking out publicly, because that's when this house of cards actually starts to crumble. When Daniel Andrews can no longer send his private army out onto the streets to push women over and pepper spray them in the eyes, to hospitalize protesters, to arrest people by the hundreds, when that stops, he falls very, very quickly. Now, I don't think that day is terribly far away, but I don't think it's tomorrow either. I think that we're going to witness what is likely to be a fairly ugly chapter in the history of Victoria and in the history of Melbourne. But I want to encourage you, because what's happened today is hugely significant. Let me put it to you this way. When I played you the video of Saturday's protest, that second time when we broke through the kettle, the first time they kettled us, we slipped out. The second time they kettled us, we broke through. After that, they gave up. The police actually left everyone alone after that. Interesting, isn't it? All of a sudden, we pushed back. We won. Now, I need to curb my cynicism a little bit, but I'm going to say this anyway. It's amazing that the police chased us, confronted us over and over again, looking for a fight. Eventually, we gave them that fight. You saw it. We pushed through that line. That was it. That was the fight. And then they went sooking to the media because they lost the fight that they started. Now, can you imagine how much worse it's going to be for them when instead of having 10,000 people like me on the streets, they've got 10,000 CFMEU members, right? If they couldn't win a fight against people like me, they sure as hell ain't going to win a fight against people like that. So I think we're heading towards the climax of this. It could have another month to run. It could be more. I don't know. I'm not going to try and put a timeline on it necessarily, but I do think that by the end of this year, things are going to be a lot better than what they are right now. I've been predicting for a little while that this month is the peak of the restrictions. Public opinion turned nearly a month ago now. It turned immediately after the playgrounds got shut down. The opinion polls shifted. The support for lockdowns went from 56% to 44% in 2 weeks after he shut down the playgrounds. Daniel Andrews overplayed his hand, pushed people too far, and they turned on him. Public opinion went. However, public opinion doesn't instantly bring down a government, right? Then we had Saturday's protest, and we pushed the police to the point that the uniformed officers, at the very least, stepped back and went, you know what, we're not doing this anymore. The commander in charge on the day gave the order and said, you know what, guys, let him go. Let him go. And after that push through that you saw, we were left alone after that. What's happening right now with the CFMEU and the riot squad, because they're not going to send uniformed officers in against the CFMEU. They're going to be sending the riot squad and they're going to be opening fire, which is what we saw today. The first thing they did, they started marching forward and they opened fire. They didn't even come to grips with the CFMEU members. They didn't hold their fire until it was necessary. They just simply, that was what they went to. Pointing their weapons, pulling the triggers, using potentially lethal ammunition. Yes, it's not live ammunition, but it is potentially lethal ammunition that they were using against the protesters. Now, I mentioned when we went back and we watched the video of, I believe her name is Anne, but that woman being pushed over. And I asked the question, I said, what mental state does that individual have to be in, the police officer that pushed her? There they were. And these were senior police officers, by the way. These were senior sergeants, is what I'm informed. I don't know what all the badges mean with Victoria Police, but apparently I'm told they were senior sergeants that were involved in that. And the man who actually did the pushing was a senior sergeant, so I'm told. He had been standing there with that line of police waiting for the protesters to arrive. They were the confrontation. They were put there to be the confrontation. That was their job. After we'd been chased for over an hour and more than 4 kilometers avoiding violence, they were the line that was supposed to create the violence. And I would have to say that his mental state was one where he was completely committed to violence, completely committed to a violent confrontation. And what comes to mind is actually a documentary that we had to watch as part of recruit course when I was in the Army Reserve, and I did the same recruit course as the regs up at Kapuka. And one of the things I really admire about the Australian Army is that they teach, as a part of their recruit course, that every single soldier is morally responsible for every single choice they make. It doesn't matter if you're following orders or not. You are still morally responsible, and you have a moral responsibility to say no to bad orders. And as a part of that training, as a part of that ethic that they train into into the Australian Army, they showed us a documentary about a massacre that happened during the Vietnam War by an American group of soldiers, where what happened was they trained and they were being prepared to get helicoptered into a particular village. And they were told that this village was going to be swarming with Viet Cong. This was going to be the fight of their lives, that it was going to be hell on earth. And then when they actually got helicoptered in, what had happened was the Viet Cong had pulled out of that village. And the only thing happening that day was a market day. And the troops landed and they started advancing on the village. And they were in such a mindset of violence and expecting violence that they opened fire on unarmed civilians. And then when they realized what they had done, they continued. And it got worse. And it's called the My Lai Massacre. You can look it up. They murdered a large number of unarmed, innocent Vietnamese civilians. Why? Because they'd been so G'd up and so prepared for this fight. And then when it wasn't there for them, they made it. They created that fight. And I believe that's exactly what happened with that police officer. He had been told that he and the other officers around him were going to stand on that line and these violent protesters were going to come down and there was going to be a fight. And then when we broke out up the other end and that the crowd of people just evaporated out from in front of him and he was deprived of that fight, he walked up to the one person who was still there and violently, physically assaulted her because of the mental space that he was in. Now that speaks to the training and the preparation of police officers. It speaks to the character of the individual involved. And I don't believe that that person should ever be allowed to be in any public office ever again. And if we don't actually see the officers involved in that specific incident being brought to justice and brought to justice publicly in front of the public so that we can be satisfied that justice has been done, then that is going to be a stain on Victoria Police for the rest of its history. That stain will never fade. So we will have to wait and see how all of that plays out. Right now, after 17 months, I cannot tell you how it feels. The expression, to use a colloquial expression, it feels like the cavalry have arrived, right? For me to be there and actually watching that protest happen, and I'm not the one there being harassed by the cops and being hit with batons. There were other people there, and full credit to those who did go in. Rukshan, Avi, so many others that did go in. I live an hour out of town and I had 2 kids to look after today. So there was simply no way I was heading in today. But the feeling of sitting there and going, this is happening. This is happening. It isn't over yet, but I think we're entering the climax. We're entering the final phase. Daniel Andrews has lost public opinion. He's losing the support of his own police force very, very rapidly, without which none of this would have been possible. And is now losing his political support base within the Labor Party itself. He has overplayed his hand again and again and again. He is going to hang on for dear life, right? He's from my cold dead hands kind of expression, that's how he's going to hold on to power. So he's not going to go easily, and it's likely to continue to be ugly. But I believe that what we saw today was the beginning of the end. The beginning of the end, potentially, of Daniel Andrews' career, given how badly he's responded to this. John Setka and his position within the CFMEU, he's done. Not tomorrow necessarily, not next week necessarily, but give it a month and he's done. He's out. And when he goes, I don't think Daniel Andrews is going to be all that far behind. So that's my assessment of the implications, my commentary on the implications of what we saw with the CFMEU today. So if you have any other questions, hit me up with them. I'm happy to be here for a little bit longer, but those are the 2 things that I wanted to cover. So for those of you that missed the first half of tonight's slow chat, I really encourage you to go back and watch it, because I covered showing video that I took plus another video from somebody else, without doubt, conclusive proof that the protesters on Saturday, so 2 days ago, were peaceful until we were pushed too far. And the police were continuously pursuing us and creating confrontation and trying to provoke violence. The evidence is unequivocal. And I showed that to you. It's the first 53 minutes of this video. Go back and watch it. Yeah, yes, 53 minutes, it's a long time. Okay, sure. But how much time have you got? You're in lockdown. Plus, this is one of the most important issues of our time. right? This is one of the most important issues of what is going on in Victoria. Iron is asking, where am I getting that Daniel Andrews is losing public opinion? The opinion polls turned on him after he shut the playgrounds. He shut the playgrounds. He went from 56% approval of lockdowns to 44% approval of lockdowns, according to one of the polling companies, in 2 weeks. Julie says this is the quickest slow chat ever. It kind of is. I wanted to push through that first part as quickly as I could because I want people to see that. We need to flip the narrative that the media have created, that the police have created, that the government have created, that we were the problem. Do I think that the police on Saturday were newbies' first day on the job? They brought in a lot of police. They actually were bussing police in from country areas, etc. So I can't speak to that specifically, but I think there was probably a wider cross-section of police. But I think actually a huge amount of the credit for the success of Saturday from the protesters' point of view goes to the organisers. Their decision to move the meeting point to being outside of that ring that the police had set up, where they wanted us to be inside that ring and they could just bring all their resources in and bam. And boy, that would have sucked for us. And so the organisers very, very cleverly chose to shift the meeting point to outside of that ring. And from there, I mean, the riot squad never came to grips with us on Saturday. They never got into position. The riot squad they're not light infantry. They can't move quickly. All right, they have a lot of equipment, a lot of relatively heavy equipment, and they need to be bussed around. All of their equipment needs to be transported. They need to get out, get their stuff on them, get into position, etc. It takes time. And because we were outside of their little killing zone that they had set up and we stayed mobile, they were never able to get the riot squad to grips with us. They nearly did in that first kettle. It was close. They nearly got there, but they never quite got there. So I think actually credit for our success on Saturday actually rests entirely with the organisers of the protest. I think they did an outstanding job. You saw for yourself, some protesters did the wrong thing. Other protesters called them out. Other protesters, myself included, were continuously calling for calm and continuously calling for non-violence. And the only time we actually initiated anything was in order to push our way through that police cordon the second time that they tried to kettle us. So all of that is there. It's a matter of public record. You can show that the media are lying. The government is lying. Police command are lying. There can be no other conclusion when you look at what they've said and then when you look at the reality of what happened on the ground. Okay, so any more questions? Riot squad will be at CFMEU from the get-go tomorrow, says Trevor Douglas. Probably. Sorry, I should have put that up on screen. Let me do that. Riot squad will be at CFMEU from the get-go tomorrow. Probably. But have you seen what happens when unionists get pissed? Yeah. Watch this space. This is why I'm saying this is the climax. This is the series final. You know, the television serial called The Rise and Fall of Dictator Daniel Andrews. Right? We're heading towards the series final. And boy, do the writers have some twists and turns for us as we go forward towards the end of Daniel Andrews' career. I do genuinely believe that Daniel Andrews has now overplayed his hand to the degree that he will reach a point, it's not yet, but he will reach a point where his continuation as premier is not politically viable anymore and his own party will tear him down. That it's not going to happen tomorrow. Don't go celebrating just yet. But I think he's reached the point of no return. You know, jumped the shark. If I can use a term that'll be recognized by all the oldies. Was it Fonzie jumped the shark in an episode of whatever that show was, right? And from there it all just went downhill, right? It just got more and more ridiculous after that, and the show lost its magic. Well, the Daniel Andrews show, he has overplayed his hand too many times now, and he's lost his magic. The gloss has worn off. And all I can see from here is things moving further and further against him. When a dam bursts, it happens all at once, but at the same time, the cracks can be visible for a long time before that. And what we're now seeing are the cracks. The dam burst will happen unexpectedly and will probably take me by surprise. And the thing that actually triggers it will probably be ridiculous. It will probably be something none of us could ever have possibly predicted. But what we can see are the cracks that are forming. Pamela is saying, I'd like to hear your opinion on the bikies. I wasn't there, so I'm hearing things, but I don't really want to be repeating too much hearsay. I'm hearing two main theories. I will repeat both of those theories with the huge caveat that I don't know. I wasn't there. One theory that I'm hearing is that they came out to protect their clubhouse because they have a clubhouse next to the CFMEU headquarters, and the CFMEU headquarters front door were being smashed in, etc. So one story is that they came out and actually punched on against the CFMEU members. However, John Setka is known to have a lot of bikie relationships. And so the other theory is that John Setka actually called in the boys, so to speak, because he was afraid for his own personal safety. Angry members were literally kicking their way into and through that front door. And I think he wanted to have some heavies on his side at the front door. So are either of those true? I don't know. I don't know. And I wasn't there, so I can't really shed a lot of light on that. Okay. Bikers are fighting the tradies, not the cops. They were there to protect Setka. So that's Cindy's view on that particular one as well. Okay, Jim wants to know more about the FDA ruling on boosters. So it's technically not an FDA ruling. There was an FDA advisory body. I should probably actually talk about this because there will be people who aren't aware. There is an advisory body that considered whether or not they should recommend the approval of Pfizer's booster shot. That's meant to be given as a third jab, basically. So you've been double jabbed, and now there's meant to be this booster shot third jab. And the advisory committee had an 8-hour online hearing, which you can see I posted to my Facebook page a couple of posts ago, yesterday sometime, I think. If you want to watch the whole 8-hour thing, you can put yourself through that torture if you want to. But you'll find in that post, you'll find a link that'll take you somewhere where I was able to post a link to a cut down version of it. I couldn't post that to Facebook because as a link, I suspect it's going to get censored soon. And my page cannot tolerate any more strikes. I'm very, very close to losing my Facebook page, which actually I should say, go to topherfield.net. Please do this. Go to topherfield.net. That's my blog. I don't use it all that often. But on the right-hand side, you will find a spot where you can put your email address in to join my mailing list. Again, I don't use my mailing list very often. You're not going to get covered in spam. You'll get a welcome email and 1 or 2 emails in the next 3 days. And then there'll probably be nothing. For a while, I send out maybe 1 email a month. But what that means is that I can still contact you and we can still communicate if my page does get shut down, because it's pretty freaking close to getting wiped off Facebook right now. So if you could do that, that'd be great. You can also find me on YouTube, Topher Field, and I'm also now on Instagram at Topher Field. So if you just join up to all of those, then that means that if I do get deplatformed off one of them, then hopefully I'll still be on at least one of those other ones. But if you put your email address into topherfield.net, in fact, it's down the bottom of the screen, just here, then you put your email address in there and I'll be able to stay in touch with you no matter what happens with my social platforms. So all that's a long-winded way to saying the FDA ruling, you can find out about it on my Facebook page, but you'll have to follow the links and click through to get to where it was safe for me to post the shorter version that goes through that. The testimony given, the testimony that committee heard that ultimately led to them rejecting approval for that booster. They voted against it 16-2. A resounding no. We do not recommend the approval of this booster shot. The testimony given is astonishing. Now, it won't be astonishing to most of my viewers. You will already have heard most of this stuff and you'll already know that most of it's actually true, but it's astonishing to have heard it given as testimony to an FDA advisory committee and live streamed by CNBC. This is not some dark web conspiracy theory website. This was testimony given to an FDA advisory committee and live streamed by CNBC. It is astonishing. And it led to this committee recommending against the approval of the Pfizer booster shot, 16-2. This is a bombshell. It is absolutely massive. So if you want to know more about that, you can scroll down my page, my Facebook page a little bit, and you'll see more information about that. Luke says, am I going to roll into the protest tomorrow? I'm trying to sort out some child minding to be able to do that, but we'll see. I'm going to try and get in there and cover it. But hey, Rukshan's doing a fantastic job. RV Yemeni no doubt will be covering it as well. And there's others as well that I know do get in there and live stream it and cover it. So there's going to be no shortage of perspectives on whatever happens tomorrow and the day after. I am trying to organize that, but my wife's the one paying the bills at the moment with all the lockdowns and everything else. And so I need to look after the kids and make sure that she's able to do that. So logistics are tricky, but I am trying to do that. The military will get involved soon. I don't know. There are laws against the military being deployed on Australian soil, certainly with weapons. I mean, I know that's been broken a number of times with the military being deployed unarmed. And I'm uncomfortable even with that. I do agree that soldiers are better trained than police, certainly in issues of morality. soldiers actually do get better moral training than the police do. I've had a number of police officers confirm to me that there is actually no real moral training in Victoria Police at all. Their training is about obeying the law and following the orders that the government gives and that the chain of command gives. They are literally being primed in this idea of, I was just following orders. That is from what I'm being told by members who are inside the police and what I'm being told by retired members. That's actually the attitude the Victoria Police have, and I think we're seeing that playing out now. Andrew says, aren't the military already supporting the police? Yes, but in an unarmed role. So they're not walking around with their weapons. It's not like we've seen in France and other places where they've got members of the military standing on street corners. Is that going to happen here? It's hard to see it happening. But then again, if you'd asked me 18 months ago whether any of this was going to happen, I would have said, you're crazy. So, I can't rule it out. I just, I don't know. Someone had a great question and now it's scrolled on. So sorry, that was a good question, but the screen reset with all the comments. Okay, I should get Telegram too. I already have so many freaking platforms. It's ridiculous. Let me self-promote for a moment. I'm shameless self-promotion. I started up a Subscribe Star. It's like a Patreon, but it's without all the cancel culture and all. I hate Patreon. It's not Patreon, but it's an equivalent. It's called Subscribe Star, subscribestar.com/Topher Field. I've done this for 12 years. And up until about a month ago, I had never asked for ongoing financial support. And because I wasn't comfortable with it, I would ask for donations towards specific projects was how I would do that. I would fundraise for a specific video project that I would do. However, I've realized in hindsight that was a mistake, because if I'd had more financial resources, I could have done so much more. I would have had a bigger platform and could have done so much more in this moment where it was really needed. So I regret now my ego kind of getting in the way and being a bit too proud and not wanting to do that. So if you appreciate what I do and you would like to empower me to do more, I mean, I wouldn't have to spend as much time looking after the kids if my wife wasn't the one who's shouldering the entire financial burden of the family right now. Just as for instance, you'll notice some nice new branding. We've paid someone to make that for me because I'm trying to improve the professionalism of what I do, and that will enable it to then reach more people and to go further out, and people will take it a little bit more seriously as time goes on. This background is going to change again in another month or two as I get things organized for that. There's a lot of changes coming. And if you want to help me to be able to do that and get and build a bigger platform and get a bigger reach to be able to have a bigger impact, I would really appreciate that. So subscribestar.com/Topher Field is where you can learn about that. Self-promotion over. Moving on. Okay. Am I actually tofu? Oh, hang on. Where'd that go? Someone asked, am I actually Tofu Field? That was weird. That jumped again. No, I'm not. I'm Topher Field. So Topher is the last half of Christopher. So Christopher, my dad is Christopher and I'm Christopher. So my dad got the first half of the name and I got the second half of the name. Simple as that. Split it up, split it down the middle. I got more letters than him, so I won. But I got the second half. So that's how that one came about. Where is the Prime Minister? Yeah, look, this is an interesting one. I can't get too excited about the Prime Minister stepping in on what really are state issues. The separation of powers is really important, and it's something that needs to be kind of held sacred, and the separation of the layers of government, etc., needs to be kind of held sacred, even in these sorts of moments, because once we allow that to break down, we can never really put those barriers back up again. So I'm of the view that the Governor-General should have stepped in, because they are the one who is supposed to be safeguarding us from a situation like this. Unfortunately, under the current system, the Governor-General, whilst they actually have to be, the Governor, they have to be approved by the Queen. They're actually recommended by the Premier. So the Premier says, hey, here's my best buddy. Can you please approve them to be the governor, the person that's supposed to be holding me accountable? And the Queen just kind of signs off on that. So in practice, we're not really seeing the checks and balances that are supposed to be operating within Australian politics and within Victorian politics actually working. Do we need the federal government to step in? In the short term, that'd be nice. The long-term consequences, I would be a little bit worried about. Okay. Apparently there's a troll on YouTube. I'll deal with that later. Where is the Prime Minister? He doesn't get a pass on any of this. Yeah, and he knows that. He certainly doesn't get a pass on any of this, and he's been in disgrace with all the border closures, locking Australian citizens out of Australia. One of the real concerns that I have is the way that the brand of Australia has been so damaged in all of this, and the value of an Australian passport has just been decimated. Why? An Australian passport was one of the best in the world, but the number one function of a passport is to allow you to travel, and especially to allow you to get back in. And the minute you take that away, why would anyone want an Australian passport now? I mean, my family, we're looking at getting a second passport now to give us more options so that we can travel the world, even if Australia continues to be the absolute nutcase, basket case that it is right now. Okay, if you do cover events in the next few days, where will you broadcast it? So by default, I do everything as a Facebook Live. So you'll see it on my Facebook page, at least up until my Facebook page gets pulled down. Right? For as long as my Facebook page is there, that is by default where most of my content goes and most of my live streams go. Pardon me. I am getting more active on Instagram, but it's still less so than what I do on Facebook. YouTube gets the least of all of my content. YouTube gets the least. Sorry, that's just how it is. It's a platform that's designed around video, and so a lot of the other content that I do that's written or just still images, it just doesn't. YouTube doesn't work as a platform for that. And I think I see who the troll is. Let me just use the block button. There we go. Peter Stagg, how do you get a second passport? There's a bunch of ways to do it. If you have ancestry, the easiest, the cheapest way is if you have a parent, a grandparent, and depending on the country, even a great-grandparent who held the passport of another country, that can often entitle you to actually getting a passport yourself. Now, there's a lot of paperwork involved. There can be a little bit of time involved. There's a lot of people applying for passports right now because there's a lot of people in the same boat. And so it does take a bit longer than it used to. So it can be a 6 to 9 month process. And you need to have the right paperwork. You might need to pay somebody back in the countries whose passport you're trying to get to actually do a search for a birth certificate or various other proof that you're going to be required to produce in order to show that your ancestor really did have that passport. So by ancestry is the cheapest and usually the fastest, even though it can still be the better part of a year. You can also buy passports, and it sounds really shady, but it's a thing that there's over 100 countries in the world that have some mechanism by which you can just bring a chunk of money into the country and get a passport. And Australia actually does it as well. It's just you need a lot of money to do it in Australia. In a lot of Caribbean countries and Eastern European countries, they will do it at a much better price. And so for me and my family, if we wanted to get a passport from a place like Dominica, which is in the Caribbean, that would cost us a grand total of the better part of $200,000. Big chunk of change, right? Like I said, if you've got ancestry, that's the best way to do it. If you don't have ancestry, well, you're going to be looking at stumping up some cash through something like that. You can also do it by investment. So when I say stumping up cash, when you're buying a passport, you're making a donation. So you're donating into a sovereign fund that they'll use to build hospitals or to build universities or to build infrastructure and that sort of thing. So the money's just gone. Okay. You do then have the option with a lot of countries as well of investing. So technically the money is still yours. You've bought, usually it's real estate. It's a bit of a trap, though, because they'll restrict the kinds of real estate that you're allowed to buy, and the real estate is really, really rubbish, and you'll never be able to sell it for anywhere near what you paid for it. So in the end, it's probably going to cost you about as much as just actually going in and donating to the sovereign fund. And Peter, if you don't like it, leave. Bye. I'm answering people's questions. People ask me a question, I answer it. I don't need you here. Okay, so the safest place to be now is Texas, where they've pretty much revoked all gun laws and everyone can open carry. There's a lot more to the US than just gun laws and the right to own and carry a gun. I've spent a bit of time in Texas. I enjoyed Texas. I have no issue with people carrying guns. However, I have an issue with their federal government. That thing is massively out of control. You've got, the IRS, the American Tax Office, right? The Internal Revenue Service, I think they call it. They have their own SWAT teams. The Bureau of Land Management has its own paramilitary wing. Why the hell do these departments need military subdivisions within their ranks. There's a lot wrong. I mean, they've got the Bill of Rights, which is nice, but every single thing on that Bill of Rights is just routinely violated. First Amendment, the free speech, routinely violated. People have to keep going back to the what do they call it? The Supreme Court over there, I think they call it, in order to actually protect that right over and over and over again. The Second Amendment is infringed in all kinds of different ways. You mentioned the Second Amendment. They've got a lot more rights in Texas than they do elsewhere. Great, that's nice. But it's still infringed in a lot of different ways. The Fourth Amendment, the right to not be searched and have things seized without a warrant that specifically names you, the place, and the things to be seized. Well, that's gone. That's completely gone over there. All they have to do is have a well-trained drug dog sit down next to you, and all of a sudden they own you, right? So the US has a lot of issues. Australia's got a lot of issues right now too, but the US is no perfect solution to that. Having said that, I would live in Texas. I'd be quite happy to live in Texas. I would live in Florida, but I would go in with my eyes open. There are some real issues with their federal government over there. Now, if Texas or Florida were to secede from the USA and get out from under that federal government, I'd be there in a heartbeat. I'd be very, very happy to live there under those circumstances. But the federal government in the US is a big freaking worry. How can you leave if you can't fly without getting the jab? That's not quite true. So, and people that I know or know of are leaving all the time successfully without having been jabbed. There was actually a video that went semi-viral on Instagram a little while ago of a woman who had just arrived in Playa del Carmen. She did not have to be jabbed in order to leave. What she did have was a second passport, and she knew how to do the paperwork to actually put in the application to leave. So it can be done without having a jab. But yeah, it's tricky. And you're probably going to need a second passport. It's very, very difficult if you don't have a second passport. Yes. Tomorrow says, I think the South tried to secede once before. Yeah, it didn't end so well. So we'll see whether Texas or Texit or Florida exit or something. I don't know what they call it for Florida. We'll see whether that ever happens. But yeah, if they manage to pull that off, I'd be there in a heartbeat. Just looking at questions. Okay. So Heidi says, soon we may need a jab to leave once they bring in the international COVID passport. The whole COVID passport thing is falling apart. It's falling apart before our eyes. The UK have now officially rejected it. They're not going to bring one in. France is having massive riots because of their one. Italy, people who have been vaccinated are burning their green pass in protest over the idea of a segregated society. Denmark has rejected it. We're now about to finally see Melburnians getting on the streets and really actively rejecting it, in my opinion. I don't think the whole COVID passport thing is going to last all that long. Now, I've been saying for a little while we haven't seen the peak of the madness with the COVID passports yet. I think it's going to get a bit worse before it gets better, but I don't think it's going to last all that long. Okay. Who and how would we vote to get these parties out? Well, one of the nice things, one of the silver linings in all of this has been the fact that it's kind of sorted the men from the boys, sorry to use sexist language, sorted the men from the boys politically speaking. And what we've seen is some really good people standing up. Now, they tend to be, they're almost exclusively in very minor parties. So the Liberal Democrats are worthy of a shout out. Tim Quilty for Northern Victoria and David Limbrick for South Eastern Metro. They are MPs that have been on our side and speaking out and have been absolutely fantastic. So the Liberal Democrats deserve a vote. I would say that the United Australia Party deserves a vote based on Craig Kelly and what a good job he's been doing federally. I would say that One Nation deserves a vote, again, because of how their senators have been doing. Pauline Hanson and Malcolm Roberts have been doing some really good work. They don't get a lot of press. They don't get a lot of attention, and there's a reason for that. They don't want them to get a lot of attention, but they have been doing some good work. The problem is there's not enough of them. And so by voting for them, then we can potentially put more of them in. The most important thing to do in the next round of elections, so we've got a federal election in March, April, May, and then we've got a state election coming up in November of next year. The most important thing to do is to vote for every single minor party that you like first and then can tolerate, before you vote for any major party. This is the key message that we need to get across to everybody in the lead up to this election. Vote for every single minor party. That you start with the ones you like, and then work your way down until eventually you'll reach a point where you're just like, no, I just can't do it. Like, I can't vote for the Greens. I just can't do it. And at that point, you finally put in the major party that you would prefer, if you even want to do that at all, right? But you would put in the major party that ultimately, if none of the minor parties get enough votes to get a seat, then your vote will eventually flow through to the major party. So you might get the lesser of two evils, so to speak. But at that point, at least your voters had the opportunity to help each and every one of the minor parties that you like, then the ones you can tolerate, and then eventually it'll flow through to the lesser of two evil major parties if you want to do that. So that's the number one message we need to get everyone to understand. Vote for every single minor party that you can live with before you vote for any of the major parties in this election. Okay. Do I think we can bring Australia back to the Constitution under the Queen of England and remove the illegal Constitution of Australia? I think it's very difficult to undo what's been in place for decades. So can we ever get back to that? I'm not sure. I would be surprised. Miracles do happen from time to time, but that's a big one. What we can do is get things to function better at a practical level and get our rights to be properly respected at a practical level. In Victoria, we have the Imperial Acts Application Act of 1984, which explicitly brings in a whole bunch of common law, including Magna Carta and a whole bunch of other stuff, into Victorian law. Try standing up in a court and using it. In practice, it doesn't work. Or in practice, they find ways to thwart you if you try and use it most of the time. Some people do manage to succeed, but most of the time, most judges won't have a bar of it, and they'll find a way to thwart you. So we don't even necessarily have to undo all of that damage that's been done at a constitutional level. If we can actually just get them to start respecting the laws that we actually have, as flawed as they may be and as illegitimate as they may be, even just that would be a pretty good step in the right direction. But it's hard to see that making a huge difference. I vote like that. It makes no difference. So talking about voting for all the minor parties, yes, because you're one vote. This is why we need to get the message out. We need to get a huge number of people voting like that. And then it does make a difference. You know, one vote in a democracy does not make a difference. You're absolutely right. Untangle from the UN. That would be nice. It's one of the things that I think One Nation are good on. Someone said before, One Nation never, I'd never vote for them. Look, I dislike a lot of their policies, but they are good on the UN and they're good on lockdowns. Disentangling ourselves from all of these international kind of agreements that are literally just sapping away our sovereignty, sapping away our ability to make the decisions that we believe are best for ourselves, I think is a very, very good thing to do and a very important thing to do. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of current politicians even interested in talking about it, let alone trying to do it. And that's why we need to, you know, if we're going to get saved, if we're not going to go down a Venezuela path, just due to the ridiculous spending and welfare state and everything else, that's a whole other topic for another day. Then it's going to take a massive shift in who gets elected, and that requires a massive shift in our electorate and the people actually doing the voting. Now, this is a moment where a lot of people are waking up politically. A lot of people have been slapped in the face by what's happened over the last 18 months. They've ignored politics all their life. They've just voted for the same person their parents voted for, whatever it may be. And now for the first time, they're sitting up and paying attention. So I think we actually have a shot. We actually have an opportunity to really, really change things in a pretty big way. Will it happen? History would suggest probably not. But then again, every now and again, miracles do happen. Dump the UN would be a good start. I do agree. Difficult to do. Go back to pre-federation, independent, separate countries. That requires a referendum, and that requires a supermajority. I think it has to be a majority in every state. I don't know my constitutional law well enough, but it's got to be it's a pretty significant vote that would have to support something like that. So that would be a hard thing to pull off. This, I think, is actually the answer. We actually need to break the politician's spirit, and we're seeing that right now with Daniel Andrews. This is what we need to do with Daniel Andrews: is absolutely break him. to the point that he cannot find anyone left to support him, and he gets dragged down by his own party. And if you set an example, I mean, I used to say it tongue in cheek, I'm getting a little bit more serious about it now, that the problem with this country is that we haven't tarred and feathered a politician in too long. The old tar them, feather them, and run them out of town kind of thing. When a politician did the sort of stuff that they're doing to us here in Victoria, the people used to run them out of town. And that set a standard, a minimum standard. And then the next politician would look around and go, "Ooh, okay, I better not do that. I'd better do a better job. I better look after people better than what that guy did." And unfortunately, where we're at is a situation where politicians have been getting away with this for a very, very long time. And we need to break them. We need to actually bring about such a level of opposition to them, of people willing to hit the streets, that they have to realize that their position is untenable and leave. And if they won't, then the other politicians around them have to realize that them being in that position is destroying their careers along with the head honcho's career, and they tear them down in an effort to save their own skin. This is actually the answer: breaking the politician spirit. To me, it's people on the streets. That's really the best opportunity that we have. Frankie's asking, what are my thoughts on Clive Palmer calling for state governments to be dissolved? I think it would be very dangerous to eliminate states from the picture, because that would concentrate so much more power into Canberra. I'm of the view that decisions are best made where they are closest to the people that they affect. The more decisions made in Canberra, the worse the decisions, right? Because we're a long way from Canberra, and the people in Canberra don't understand my life and what I do and how I want to live and what makes me happy, etc. My local council, I at least can get there a lot more easily. My one vote counts more in a local council election than it does at a federal election. I would actually be more interested, rather than eliminating the states, I would be more interested in breaking up the states. Instead of only having, 6 states and 2 territories, let's have 20 states. Right? Let's create a regional state along the Murray River in between New South Wales and Victoria. Let's separate North and South Queensland. Let's split up WA. Let's actually create more states, more opportunity for competition between the states, where they can actually make a difference between what their policies are. Now, people say, "Oh, that doesn't work." Well, actually, we've just had a real life example that it does. We've had over 40,000 people leave Victoria. Most of them went to Queensland, but every other state grew. Victoria lost 40,000 people last year. You know why? Daniel Andrews, right? We had a government that they decided they didn't like and they wanted to leave. If we had more states, it would be easier for people to do that, and there would be more competition and more options for people to look at and go, do I want to go over there or do I want to go over there? But in order for that to work, we need the states to have quite a lot of power and the federal government to have less power. So, for example, our income tax, it's the same in every state. Why? Because it's done by the federal government. If the federal government had no taxing power, let's flip it on its head. Right now, the federal government has almost all of the taxing power. They do the GST, they do the income tax, they get the money, and then they distribute the GST back to the states. It makes the states these little puppets that they can kind of control financially. What if we flipped it on its head? The states have all of the taxing power, the federal government has none, and the federal government has to then derive its revenue from the states directly, right? Instead of the states having to go to the federal government. Then all of a sudden you'd see competition on taxation. States could actually start to have different amounts of income tax, different property taxes, different levels of goods and service tax if they wanted to. And we would actually start to get more options and more possibility to choose where we want to live. And when I talk about a plan B, those of you that have followed me for a while, I talk about a plan B, leaving Australia for another country. It's this idea of actually allowing governments to compete for my money. Allowing governments to compete for my taxes, rather than just sitting here and complaining about the fact that my taxes are too high and the money gets wasted. How about I go somewhere where the taxes are lower and it gets spent in a better way, right? Now, what if that was possible at a state level? Instead of having to leave the country, you could just move states, and there were more states to choose from. At that point, I think you'd start to see a real competitive federalism coming in Australian politics, and I think that would change the landscape. So I would go the other way. Don't eliminate the states. Actually make more states, break them up, but invest power back into them. Sorry, they keep jumping. I'll be halfway through reading one, and then all of a sudden it'll jump because more people comment, and suddenly I lose where I was. Okay. So I appreciate the questions. I've had fun answering a number of questions and jumping all over the place the last little while. Yes, Victoria and South Australia would go bankrupt. Victoria shouldn't go bankrupt. It would go bankrupt unless we wised up very quickly, but it shouldn't go bankrupt. Victoria can generate plenty of tax revenue for itself, but we just spend it so badly at the moment. Min says, read faster. Thanks, mate. I'll try that. I'll do that next time. Okay, so I've been asked a few times about New South Wales. What are my thoughts on New South Wales and what's happening there? Look, I don't really know. I live in Victoria. Things are so crap in Victoria that really my focus is mostly on Victoria. And yeah, so it's not something that I'm going to particularly talk about because I just don't know. Performance-related pay for every politician. How do you define their performance? I would define it as saying, okay, if the budget's balanced, we'll give you a pay rise. If human rights are being respected, okay, you can get a bonus for that. These sorts of things. Other people would turn around and say, well, your performance is measured on environmental outcomes or is measured on other things. So we would first have to have an argument about what are the metrics, what are the KPIs, what are the performance metrics for a politician, what makes a good politician. That would be an argument and a half. So Elizabeth disagrees, and that's fine. I think the states already have too much power. I want to be an Australian, not a Victorian. That I can understand why that would make sense, but imagine if Daniel Andrews was the Prime Minister and not a Premier, right? Put yourself in that scenario, and you might understand why I'm not a big fan of the federal government having. I think it already has too much power. I think we need to devolve power down a lot more. Why is the Constitution so ineffective these days? Well, because it's extremely expensive to actually push a court case to the point where constitutional issues come into it. If you walk into your local county court and try and make a constitutional argument, you're not going to get anywhere. They're going to rule against you, and then you have to appeal it. And depending on the pathway, you might have to go to the Supreme Court or the federal court, and then you might have to end up in the High Court. Well, $500,000 and 3 years of your life later, $500,000 if you're lucky, and 3 years of your life later, you might finally get a decision on that constitutional issue. So the issue with the Constitution is that it doesn't actually, you can't use it in your day-to-day interactions with a police officer or with a local council or whatever. It's not a practical piece of paper that you can use in front of them and expect to have any effect on them. You try and use the Constitution on the guys that were chasing us around Melbourne on Saturday. Good luck to you. Right? It only actually gets taken seriously once you've paid the entry fee of a couple of $100,000 and a few years of your life to work your way through the legal system to the point where you can actually use it. So unfortunately, that's just the practical reality of how our legal system works today. Harriet, thank you, Topher. You've given me so much hope. I'm very happy to do that. I am overall a very optimistic person, and I do think the future is going to be amazing. I have my bad days, of course I do. We all do. But I do think the future is going to be amazing. We've just got a hell of a fight in between now and when we get there. Michelle White says, what about common law? Kind of the same problem. Police aren't trained in understanding any of this stuff, really. They're just trained about what the statute says, and they are given an order. They might be educated on one or two little statutes that give them the power to do whatever the order says they should do, and then off they go. Understand that the people enforcing the law, the police themselves, they have an incentive to keep their members at the worst part of the Dunning-Kruger curve. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is this idea. I was going to say theory. It is a theory, but I think it's also fairly self-evident that people's confidence and people's actual aptitude and understanding about any given topic are two very different things. So our understanding of something starts at zero and slowly creeps its way up. We learn more and more and more about a given topic. And let's say it's the law, a police officer learning about the law. It takes time. And it's going to, over a career, they will come to learn more and more about the law. The problem is there's this weird thing, psychological thing that happens when you teach someone just a little bit, their confidence goes sky high and they think they understand something with just a little bit of knowledge. A little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, right? The Dunning-Kruger effect, a little bit of knowledge, lots of confidence. That's where VicPol wants their members to be. They don't actually want them to understand the law. They want them to be super confident in enforcing the law and following their orders. So they teach them just enough to get them to the peak of that Dunning-Kruger confidence curve, and then hope that they don't learn anything more. And the reason why so many officers end up leaving the force after 4 years, 6 years, 10 years, utterly disillusioned, is because they learned more and their confidence crashed down, and they realized that actually, in many cases, they were part of the problem and not part of the solution. So unfortunately, again, common law, it's not going to be respected. They don't get taught this stuff. It's not going to be respected in practice when you're face to face with a police officer or a tax agent or whatever government department you might be dealing with. Unfortunately, it's not likely to be respected at all. Again, you've got to end up in the courts and spending an absolute fortune on that. So Jess says, my bad day was when they announced the roadmap. It lifted my spirits watching you on Insta with Carl's. So Carl's J. Soda is her full name. When you were asked about what you thought of it, yes, I did a very graphical demonstration. You can find that on my Instagram, IGTV. I did a fairly lengthy chat yesterday with Carl's J. Soda. And right at the very end, someone asked me what I thought of the roadmap. And I showed everybody in no uncertain terms what I thought of the roadmap. Teenagers know everything, Dunning-Kruger effect, 100%, right? They're starting to get to grips with life. They have a little bit of knowledge and all the confidence. That's exactly it. And if I can extend the analogy, the VicPol want their officers to remain adolescents, right? They want them to remain adolescents when it comes to their understanding of the law and remain super, super confident. Do I think the CFMEU will fight the riot squad? I feel like we're going to find out tomorrow. I think we're all going to find out together. Is that because the law is too complicated? It is way too complicated. I touch on this quite regularly, so my apologies to those that have heard this before. We have in this country a legal principle that says ignorance of the law is no excuse under the law. You cannot stand up in the court and say, Your Honor, I didn't know that I was speeding because I didn't know that there was a law about speed. I didn't know that I had to pay my taxes. I didn't know there was a law about that. Ignorance is no excuse. You can't say I didn't know. But that is completely immoral in a country where the law amounts to tens upon tens of thousands of pages. And then to actually know what your obligations are, you then have to know some court precedents. You have to understand the regulatory environment, which is in addition to the law. So various government bodies that are writing rules all the time. You have to know all of that. Ignorance of any of that is no excuse, but it's impossible to know all of that. And so it's a really immoral, in my opinion, our legal system is actually genuinely immoral. It is placing people under a burden that no one can bear. Not even lawyers know the law. They specialize into a certain area because it's impossible. Even if you make it your career, you cannot know the law. In my opinion, this country needs to be slashing the amount of laws, rules, regulations, red tape, etc. that we have until I will accept a book that takes 2 days for someone at a year 10 level of reading to read. Once that's our law, and any adult with a year 10 education can sit down and read it in 2 solid days, I will accept that that is a workable amount of law. Once you go beyond that, I think it becomes completely unworkable and genuinely immoral. And that's what we have today, in my opinion. Alistair says, Topher, new to your channel. What is your relationship with RDA? Are they the next political force? I like Monica. I like Morgan. I like what they've done. They've kind of come out of nowhere and they've built something really great in a very short space of time. Monica's still in prison to my knowledge, so my heart goes out to her with that whole situation. I would love to say, yes, they're the new political force. But unfortunately, and nothing to do with them, I had this conversation with someone a little while ago. They wanted to encourage me to start a new political party. They were like, "Oh, Topher, you've got a following. You've got your head screwed on well. You could start a political party." And they were going to bring funding and blah blah blah. And I said, "Listen, go to Wikipedia and have a look at all the political parties that have existed in Australia's very short history. Just federally. Just do it federally, or do it for the Victorian state. But do it federally. I think that's probably the most interesting because it started in 1901, relatively short amount of time ago." Have a look at all the political parties that have existed in that time. Have a read of that list and notice how many you've never heard of, right? Now, in some cases, that's because they came and went before you were born, fine. But many of them still exist right now. Many of them show up on the ballot. That's why the Senate ballot is so ridiculously long. There's all these parties throwing their hat in the ring to try and get a Senate seat. Australians are absolutely committed to this two-party duopoly nonsense. This LNP versus Labor Greens kind of dichotomy. And getting people to not vote for one of the major parties is one of the most difficult things in the world. In my personal opinion, the minor parties that are going to benefit from this current awakening of people to politics, where people are paying attention more than they ever have before, are the ones that have a really good ground game. It's the ones that can get the corflutes, the signs up in people's yards. It's the ones that can have people standing on polling booths handing out how to vote cards. There's a massive logistical aspect. If you're a minor party and you want to get a senator in, a lower house seat is even harder, but let's talk about senator because that's the one that is actually possible. You've got to have a really good ground game. You've got to have a lot of volunteers who are going to walk the streets, and you've got to have the coordinators to then plan all of that, communicate all of that, and get everyone in the right place at the right time. And then you've got to have the funding and the strategic nous and someone with enough experience to then spend the money on the right things in the right places to actually get those votes. And once you do all of those things, you've got maybe a 25% chance if you do all of those things. And there are parties with 20 years of history that still haven't got it right. Right? They have 20 years of experience, they've got money, they've got everything else, and they still haven't got it right. So this is not at all a reflection on Monica, on Morgan, or on RDA, but it is a monumental task. And it's a task that people are very unlikely to get right the first time, the second time, the third time they try. It takes decades. And unless they can bring in people with those decades of political experience, I personally, I mean, I'd love to see it, but I personally doubt that they're going to be the ones that get that last Senate seat in any given race. However, you can vote for RDA and then vote for Liberal Democrats and then vote for whomever else, and then put the major party all the way down the bottom. And what that means is whichever of those minor parties actually got the most is in with a really good shot. You know, instead of having only a 25% chance, they might have a 50-50 chance of actually getting that last Senate seat. If we're talking federal election, getting that last Senate seat out of Victoria. Okay. So do I think that they're going to be a massive political force? I would dearly love to be proven wrong. I think history suggests probably not. However, I'm very glad that they're in the mix, and they will be getting my vote before I vote for my major party, right? They are in the mix of the people that I will be passing my vote through before I get to that major party. Wow, you guys are, wow, hit me with the questions. There's no way I can even keep up with any of this. Yeah, okay, so this is a good example. So James is a good one here. Liberal Party branch activity is 95% logistics and 5% ideas, and not necessarily good ones. That's absolutely spot on. That is absolutely spot on. And you've got to have the people, the manpower, the boots on the ground. And then amongst them, you've got to have them organized well. And amongst them, you've got to have the people that have the strategy that can then roll that out for everyone else to kind of engage in. It's a mammoth task. It's a mammoth task. Okay, good question. Shouldn't our priority be to get Labor out, though? The easiest way is to keep Libs in our votes with minor parties. Minor parties don't have enough seats. Is that right? Okay, so in Australia, we have a preferential voting system. So that means you can literally put people in order of how much you prefer them. But your vote stays alive all the way through unless it gets stuck. And by getting stuck, so let's talk about the Senate federally for a moment. You need, I believe it's around about 14% of the vote. So every state has 6 Senate seats up for grabs. So as soon as you've got about 14, 15, whatever it is, percent of the vote, you get a seat, right? So if the Liberal Party get, I don't know, 46% primary vote or 45% primary vote, straight away they've got 2 seats, maybe 3 seats, depending on the details in the Senate. Labor might get 2 seats, and then there's 1 seat kind of hanging, kind of up for grabs. And now, because it's the last one left, it's not about who gets to 14%. It's who has the most of what's left, right? So actually 7 to 8% becomes the threshold, because then you're the majority. So if you're voting for all the minor parties, let's say, okay, I'll talk about, hypothetically, I'm going to vote for Liberal Democrats, and then I might vote for One Nation, then I might vote for RDA, then I might vote for UAP, then I might vote for IMOP, and then I might vote for who knows who else. There's a bunch more parties whose names I've forgotten, okay? And let's say, unfortunately, the Liberal Democrats don't get enough votes. And so what happens is in Victoria, all the parties' votes are tallied up, their primary votes. And then the bottom one, the party that got the fewest votes, gets eliminated. And their votes get distributed up according to the preferences, the second choice for those people. Then whoever's still on the bottom, because that once those preferences get distributed, it might shuffle who's actually next. If all of the preferences went to the very next party, that might be enough to get them over the party above them, right? Then the next bottom one gets eliminated, distributed. reshuffle the order. Bottom one gets eliminated, distributed, reshuffle the order. That's how it works. So the moment you actually put your vote on one of the major parties, it's no longer involved. It just sticks there because they're not getting eliminated. Your preferences are not actually working their way through the system at that point. They're never going to go from the Liberals to help a minor party, but they can go from the minor party to help the Liberals. And you could have 10 minor parties that it works its way through, and sadly, none of them got enough. Even after all the preferences, tragically, none of them got enough. Your vote will still end up with the Liberal Party. If you go Liberal Party and then all the minor parties, your vote hits the Liberal Party and then it stops. And that's it. That's your vote done. And it never registers and it never moves the needle at all for any of the minor parties. So that's why it's really important. Put the minor parties first, and then if you want to, put your least bad option for the major party down the very, very bottom underneath that. Yeah, this is a good point. Also familiarize yourself with the person who will be filling the seat, not just the party. We elect people to parliament. That's true in the lower house. In the upper house, you actually elect the party and if the person leaves, they can replace them with somebody else. I think the most important thing is, number one, about voting in that order, minor parties, and then the major one. Number two, actually get involved, right? So I talked about the ground game. If you go and volunteer for a branch, a Liberal Party branch or a Labor Party branch, you're one of many, many people, and it doesn't move the needle very much. If you go to one of these minor parties and you sign up and you become a financial member, it's not usually very expensive, less than $100. And then you say, hey, listen, keep me in the loop. I will show up for you on polling day and I will hand out how to vote cards. I will walk the streets and do letterbox drops. I'll do whatever else. For a minor party, if they had another 10 people, another 20 people, another 50 people across the whole state willing to do that, that actually has the potential to move the needle for them. But I would suggest get to know particularly the Senate candidates, because the lower house candidates for minor parties are very unlikely. Like it's not even a 1% chance that they're going to somehow magically get up. With a few exceptions, actually, but by and large, there's almost no chance that they're going to get up. But the Senate candidate could. So get to know who the Senate candidate is for the parties that you want to support. Even in the upper house, you can vote below the line. Yes, we're getting a little bit nerdy and into the weeds. You can vote below the line, and that allows you to select the individual senators that you want to support as opposed to the parties. But when you're talking about minor parties, they're not going to get more than one senator in. And if you're choosing to vote below the line and vote for their number two option first, there is precisely zero chance that there's enough people doing that to get the number two candidate of a minor party elected over the top of the number one candidate, who is very unlikely to get elected in the first place. So I don't think it makes a huge difference when it comes to minor party voting. It can make a difference when it comes to major party voting and who you choose to select first for the Senate there. Okay. Yep, Peter, you're absolutely spot on. The Victorian construction industry will be closed in lockdown parts of the state for 2 weeks in response to the events today. It sounds like retribution. It absolutely does, and it will definitely be seen that way by CFMEU members and by the building industry as a whole. Actually, it will be seen as a retribution. And Daniel Andrews might think that he can get away with this, but the smart play from him would have been to say, okay, you know what, we're going to delay the mandate for a couple of weeks. We're going to go back to the way it was, before this roadmap was announced. We're not going to force you to get jabbed just yet. Let's extend the conversation. Let's play this out a little bit. Okay, would have taken the heat out of it. People would have gone back to work, and he could have thought about how to maybe massage this and message this and do the strategy that was working so well for him of divide and conquer. Don't do the whole construction industry all at once. Maybe just figure out ways to split it down to smaller and smaller chunks, and you might be able to push people through and bully people through in small sections. The fact that he went nuclear and he shut it down, and I did actually see his comment on the news where he said, where he was threatening to do it, he was, we might have to shut down the whole construction industry, and he had this little smirk on his face. And I thought every single CFMEU member that sees that is going to be coming into the city tomorrow. Like that, I think he's just lit an absolute, I think he's lit the fuse on the end of his career, is my personal opinion. Yeah, so Marco Magic says the workers demanded a shutdown during the protest. Well, this was quite interesting. This was during the confrontation of John Setka with the members, when Setka did actually come down out the front of the building and tried to talk to them and lied to their faces. Where he was, it was quite funny. This was not the response he expected. They're so arrogant, was trying to control the narrative and trying to get them to back off. And so he said to them, "Oh, what do you want me to do? You want me to shut the whole industry down? Like, what an absurd idea. What a crazy concept. There's no way you're going to want that." And then the crowd starts chanting, "Shut it down, shut it down, shut it down." So John Setka, just like Daniel Andrews, completely misread the room, completely misread the mood. And I think there's almost a certain degree of, that classic thing of, "You can't fire me, I quit." Daniel Andrews turning around and going, "You can't shut down the construction industry, I'm shutting it down." I reckon there's a certain degree of that. But in any case, he is absolutely lighting the fuse on a bomb. And I don't think he has any idea of just how much this is going to blow up in his face. Alrighty. Okay, so Anxious Aussie, I'm just a little bit tired of you, so you can get the block too. Bye. I used to tolerate trolls a lot more than I do now. I don't know, maybe I'm getting old. I'm just like, I don't need you. I don't need you. Bye. What would be the effect of a large number of people exhausting their vote and not giving any of their vote to the majors? So that strategy would be vote for all the minor ones that you like, and then don't add that last one of a major party. What would be the effect of that? Just thinking in the Senate, again, I'm not thinking lower house. It might have the effect of marginally increasing the likelihood that that last Senate seat won't go to a major party and will go to one of the minor parties. It might have a slight increase in the likelihood of that last Senate seat, getting nabbed by one of the minor parties. So that's an interesting thought. I'd need someone that knows the numbers better than me to really go through that. But anyway, Ryan, nice try. You're a grumpy, cantankerous old man, Topher. I know you love me. I'm not going to ban you. Come on, man. Bring on more grumpy, says Topher. Says James. If you don't number every box, they'll discard you. That depends. If you're voting below the line, you have to number every box. If you're voting above the line in the Senate, I believe the number is 6. You need to number 6. And then you can stop. Jackie says, "I don't blame you, re-trolls. So great to get some constructive input into all this BS that's going on up and down in Oz." Well, thank you, Jackie. Appreciate that. Yeah, Tomorrow says, "Bring back Anxious." I may have been a bit trigger happy there, to be honest. I think Anxious has been around for a while. I can't remember, but I just saw a string of stuff that I was just like, really? So anyway, I'm trigger happy now. So beware. Oh, there you go. Okay, maybe I was too trigger happy. Anxious Aussie isn't a troll. She's well informed. Okay, well, I saw a string of stuff that just seemed like she was trying to troll. But I might have misread that. I'll have a look later. Now, yeah, cool. Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's been, what is it now? 2 hours and nearly 20 minutes. So I will remind you that first 50 odd minutes was all about the Saturday protest. And when people come to you trying to pretend that the protesters were the cause of all the violence, you can tell them to come to this link, sit down, make a cup of tea, and see for themselves. It is clear. There is no ambiguity. The media lied to you. The government lied to you. The police lied to you. Okay. And if they don't want to know that, then that's on them. But now there is no excuse. They can sit down and watch it and see it clearly explained for them. Thanks, Ryan. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Craig, sitting in Port Macquarie. Loving your work. Keep it up. We haven't been through what you have in Vic, but Sydney is doing it tough. Yeah. Look, it's tough, and it felt lonely in Melbourne for a while. It felt like we were kind of being laughed at by the rest of Australia rather than supported by the rest of Australia. So it's kind of nice to feel like the rest of Australia is in a weird way suffering as well, and therefore have come around and are actually like, oh, this is a problem. So that's kind of nice. Francesca, thank you. Great to be alive for such a time as this. Well, it's, hey, living in history-making moments. You know, you read history books like, oh, imagine being alive then. No, it probably would have sucked. It kind of sucks living through history in real time. So Elizabeth says, thank you. So great we've got to this point. Thank you for your chat tonight. Logan is also defending Anxious Aussie. I will have a look at that afterwards. Maybe I've been too trigger happy. So defending her, saying she's just blunt. Lots of people saying thank you. I can't even keep up. I can't even keep up with everyone saying thank you. But yeah, so thank you. Have a good night. I'll be back on Thursday. I'm interviewing Dr. Paul Monk, fascinating guy, ex-ASIO analyst on China. He's been keeping up with what's happening in China and has, I think, a really insightful perspective on China and it's the geopolitical implications going forward. He's also worked with defense in procurement and has a lot to say about the submarine situation and other defense contracts that have been awarded. So we've just seen this switch from the French submarines to these nuclear submarines, and he has a lot to say about all that stuff. So Thursday night, settle in for my usual slow chat that I do every Thursday night. My guest is Dr. Paul Monk. He had a large opinion piece in the Weekend Australian this weekend. If you want to get a precursor of what he's going to be talking about, he was published in the Australian. He regularly is, and he's my guest on Thursday. So please do join me for that. And also find me on Instagram. Find me on my website, my blog, topherfield.net, and please do sign up for the newsletter. That's really important for when, probably not if, probably when I get deplatformed off Facebook. And also, if you would like to support my work and make it possible for me to keep doing what I'm doing and do it even more and do it even better, then subscribestar.com/topherfield is the place where you can do that. Thank you so much for your company. I look forward to seeing you again for another slow chat later in the week. Cheers.